of the Richardson ISD Board of Trustees. And on behalf of my colleagues on the board and our superintendent, Dr. Kay Wagner, we welcome our guests, our honorees, and our staff to our December 2015 regular meeting of the Richardson ISD Board of Trustees. Mrs. Altman, do we have students who will lead us in the pledges?
From Terrace Elementary this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join us in the pledge? Our pledge leaders are going to introduce themselves.
Are you sure you don't want to be? Are you sure you don't want to be in?
You are all your students.
Please join me in the pledge. All right, our first honoree of the evening is Madison Hotchko of Richardson High School. Madison designed an ornament for the House Chamber Christmas Tree 2015 Ornament Showcase. The Honorable Linda Coop from District 102 provided the glass ornament to the Visual Arts Department for this event. The showcase promotes the talent and creativity of students and constituents across Texas. The ornament will hang proudly on the Texas-sized tree in the House Chamber through January 6th. Thanks, Madison. All right, and now if the tutors from UTD, which ratings mean the school district pays lower interest cost when issuing debt to pay for capital expenses such as classroom construction and instruction equipment. Tonight we are honoring Mr. Tony Hockerode and his staff for the work that they've done.
Oh yeah, there they are.
This concludes our recognitions. Thank you, board.
Yeah, that makes me sick to my stomach.
Well, thank you very much. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I want to extend our congratulations, Madison. Outstanding. You join a long line of RISD students who have been honored with their artwork at the Capitol with an ornament, so congratulations. That's wonderful. I see Myron Sinet out there. Appreciate all y'all do for fine arts. Barbara, thank you on behalf of UTD. I know some of the kiddos probably have already snuck out. They probably have class tonight, but we are so grateful for all you all do to give back to our kids. And Mr. Oliver had said that he would like to say a few words tonight as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Caston. I just wanted to say, as the board treasurer, just wanted to echo the thanks and congratulations to Mr. Harkleroad and his staff. It's hard to overstate the importance of that bond rating, and it's not only a sign of how fiscally strong our district is, but it is such an important piece that enables us to get the maximum value out of our bonds so that we can provide the highest possible return to our community. So I just wanted to thank you and congratulate you and your staff for that. So thank you.
Okay. Next, we will now entertain comments from our visitors. Mr. Bono, do we have visitors' cards this evening? And if so, would you please provide information for our visitors about visitor comments?
Gladly, Ms. Caston, yes, we do have one card this evening, so I'll start by reading the visitors' procedures. So, there we go. A copy of the board's procedures for addressing the board is located in the table in the lobby. Please approach the podium at the front of the auditorium when I call your name. If you have written materials for the board, you may place them on the table beside the podium. A staff member will provide the copies to the board members. Please do not approach the board chute. Before speaking, we ask that you please tell us your name and the schools your child or children attend or attended. As explained in our written procedures, the public comment period is not the appropriate time to present complaints. The board will only consider complaints that remain unresolved after they have been addressed through proper administrative channels and when they have been placed on the agenda. By law, the board will not be able to engage in discussion about or make a decision on any subject that is not on the agenda, and board members will not engage in extended dialogue with speakers during the visitors section. However, we do welcome your comments and concerns, and a staff member may be available after the meeting to address your concerns or comments or to direct you to the appropriate person. Board procedures limit each speaker to a total of 3 minutes, and I will be your official timekeeper. A speaker may not take the time of another speaker. You'll see the light in front of me change from yellow to red, from green to yellow to red to indicate your time. When you see the yellow light, you have 1 minute remaining, and when the red light illuminates your time is up. Please promptly conclude your comments at that time and exit the podium. So, Ms. Caston, tonight we have 1 card. The board welcomes Mr. Bill Ames.
Good evening. My name is Bill Ames. I live in the district. In this meeting a few months ago, I questioned the wisdom of granting RISD diplomas to students who failed end-of-course STAR tests. I am not alone. The Dallas Morning News periodically runs a sounding off column asking local citizens a question that is relevant to the community. Last week's question was, should special waivers be granted for students who fail exit level tests in Texas schools? Of 16 Richardson area responders, nearly all voted no. A few of their comments that I won't read are listed in your handout. Board members, while observing your work session in which waivers were discussed, I was surprised that not one of you asked the question, how can the district offer special waivers without compromising the integrity of the RISD diploma? The sounding off responses are yet another indication that this board may be out of touch with the community that elected you to oversee the school district. Utilizing the ultimate in social promotion to improve your graduation rates is clearly not what the community wants. Does improving RISD graduation rates, board members, justify graduating students who are not prepared to enter college or the workforce?
Thank you, Mr. Ames.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is our consent agenda. Does any trustee wish to have an item pulled for separate consideration? If not, may I have a motion, please, for the consent agenda? Moved by Mr. Oliver. May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Dr. Hewen. Do we have any questions or discussion, please? Mr. Harper, I do have a question. I noticed that we do have an update tonight on bond 2011 projects that are in process and finalizing. Would you mind just giving us a summary of those, please, sir?
Yeah. I did.
Certainly. It's on page 23. We're in the 5th year of the 5-year cycle for the 2011 bond. And what you will see there is we have the dollar amounts on that page, and then schedule of bond project design, bids, and construction for 2011 is on page 31, which lets you know where we are as far as those projects. We're really just wrapping up. There are some cycle items and useful life items that are being replaced, and we would expect to completely close out the projects by certainly by the end of May. We have for most of the items that were issued in the 5th year of the cycle, they have at least 12 months spending window, and those will be, we would expect to complete those by at least June, and then do a final accounting to the board at that time.
Great, thank you, Mr. Marklewood. Are there any other questions? If not, all in favor, please raise your hand. And that motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is an information item, and that is the Retention Task Force update. Dr. Wagner.
Okay, I am excited to be bringing this report to you tonight. This report that Dr. Medina is going to be sharing with you really reflects the hard work of his entire staff, and I think his entire staff is out there tonight over a 2-year period, and they are aligned with our priority goals. If you remember last year, as a district, we really targeted retention, and this year we morphed into a goal in the same arena, but really one that's a higher level, and that's being the employer of choice in a destination district. And so this action item, or not action item, but information item really supports that, and it is a reflection of the work of the Retention Task Force. A number of people throughout the district have served on that task force over a 2-year period, and if you remember last year, we brought recommendations to the board, just an information item in terms of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 recommendations, and so this really is taking it a step further and looking at some specific recommendations for differentiated compensation as well as career pathways. And before Dr. Medina kicks it off, I will ask Dr. Stone to make some opening remarks as well.
You have a copy of your handout that we were trying to get the screen to come back up, but while we're trying to work on that, if you'll just go ahead and open up your handout that is there. There we go. There we go. And Sandra, if you want to advance to the next slide. Okay. As you're aware, back in 2013, the Board of Trustees charged the Human Resources Department with developing initiatives to reward and recognize high-performing staff and provide career pathways within the district. Since that charge was given back in 2013, a great deal of work has been done. The timing for this report tonight is perfect and this charge because it aligns with when the state of Texas will roll out with this brand new teacher evaluation system called T-Test. So because our ISD compensation model will be built on T-Test and its foundation, it's important tonight that Dr. Medina begin with a brief overview of the T-Test model and then show you how it will align with our compensation package in RSD. Dr. Medina will introduce you to the 3 RSD performance levels for teachers, differentiating compensation phases for teachers, and update you on the work to provide career pathways and other considerations and next steps. Of course, this is all based on our goal that RSD has high-performing, student-focused teachers, and our belief that RSD is a place where teachers learn, grow, and succeed, so that students learn, grow, and succeed. And so as you can see on the chart, there are a lot of ways that that goal is accomplished, but the two topics tonight that Dr. Medina is going to talk about are compensation and evaluation and career pathways. So we're so pleased tonight to start with an overview of the T-Test model. And again, the entire outcome of this is about RSD becoming an employer of choice and a destination district. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Medina. We are very excited to give you an update on a lot of work that has been done by his department.
Great, thank you, Dr. Stone. I want to thank the board for early on challenging us to look at our system in a different way. As you know, in our district, we've always had a performance-based compensation system. And I must say that in visiting with the districts around us, they not always tie compensation into or evaluation into their compensation system. So that is something that Richardson has always done. And so that is, it speaks to how we value a teacher's performance. I also want to start also by not only thanking the board, but the Retention Task Force and those individuals that are here. If you're here, actually, would you mind just standing, and if you have in any way, any responsibility with the Retention Task Force, just stand because of the incredible amount of time and hours that have been spent with that. Thank you. And of course, I'd like to thank the HR staff as well. And for all those individuals that are not here today, that provided us the opportunity to hear from them. We implemented many surveys over the years, as well as conducted focus groups, and here lately, we also added an ad hoc committee to specifically look at what we were proposing or bringing to the board today. So I want to thank them as well. Picking up on where Dr. Stone left off, one thing that I do want to say, I'm going to present the compensation, a differentiated compensation system, and I'm also going to talk about career pathways. But I don't want to move forward without emphasizing that truly this is about student success. A good evaluation system, career pathways, is about impacting student achievement, and ultimately that's what we're here for. With that said, you're going to hear me talk a lot about teachers and what's available to teachers and the additional opportunities, but I want you to have at the back of your mind that foundation that this is about students and impacting students. There will be various opportunities throughout this presentation where we'll pause between, there are 3 parts that I'll review today, and between each part there'll be an opportunity for a question and answer, so we'll break it up that way. At the end of the presentation, really what we are looking for is some feedback from you on 2 questions. Are we working on the right things? You've heard me say over time that we have to identify what we value. Have we identified the things that we value in our district? And then the second piece that I want to hear from you is, are we going about this in the right way? Those are very critical to us. Are we doing the right things, and are we going about this in the right way? Hopefully not the wrong way. So that's very critical. So as Dr. Stone said, let's start with the TPES overview. As you've read in the board update, we have a new state evaluation system that will be rolling out this coming year. I don't want to dive too deeply into it, but I think it's important for you to understand some fundamental pieces about it, because our model will build on that system for various reasons that you're going to hear me talk about today, why we've taken that approach, and provide teachers additional opportunities to receive recognition as well as additional compensation. So let's start with the T-test rubric. We know that it's coming, and what we know, and the advance this year, I'm not good at multitasking, never have been, but basically you have 3 components. Teacher practice, what's taking place in the classroom, and that occurs through an observation, and it gets recorded through what's called a rubric. And moving forward, you'll hear me refer to it as the T-test rubric. A second component is goal setting with professional development. Teachers identify areas where they want to improve, and they set a goal, and there's a process for going through that goal setting and ensuring that attainment occurs throughout the year. And then the third piece is student growth. So you might think, how is this different from what we currently do? Currently, our compensation system is basically informed by one substantive piece in PDAS, and that's what would be equivalent to the rubric, what occurs in the classroom. So where the old system had one key piece, this system has 3 pieces that will be informing a teacher's evaluation. The other piece that's different is that this model specifically has been designed, when you read the rubric and you go through the rubric, you begin to see that the rubric is designed about valuing teachers where they are, helping them identify new goals, and helping them achieve them through ongoing feedback throughout the year. So how is that different? When we do an observation, for the most part, although we do follow-up observations, there is one key 45-minute observation. This new system is an ongoing process, and it's about growth and development. And what we hear over and over from the state is, be careful about putting high stakes on this new system in terms of compensation, in terms of contract recommendation. And so they caution us about that. They don't tell us not to do it, but they want us to be mindful about what we're trying to achieve, and that's to recognize growth. So someone might say, it's okay to be developing. There are different levels. does not meet the expectations not evident. And this is just very briefly, developing, proficient, accomplished, and at the highest level distinguished. So we're saying that a teacher, as they go into this new system, that it's okay to find themselves in developing. And as we've gone through this rubric, we know that many of our teachers will fall there. And so what we don't want to do is compromise what the system was intended to do. So what we are going to be calling that is the at least developing standard. Okay? The other piece is, again, that it's about growth and helping teachers grow. The other thing that we know about this new new evaluation system is that one of the components, student growth, is not going to roll in until 17 and 18. That's important to remember. But what has Richardson done to create readiness and to ensure that we are ready? We have participated in truly our TAP programs, are the various federal grant programs that have helped us develop some readiness. But we have also participated this year in the Student Learning Objective Pilot, what's referred to as the SLO pilot, so that we can begin to gain some familiarity and develop some readiness so that when it rolls out in 17 and 18, we are ready, okay? But truly, it's not going to come into 17 and 18. The state is also going to, you heard me talk about observation, goal setting, and student growth. The state will offer multiple ways of student growth, and student learning objectives is one of them. Value added is another way, pre and post assessment, and then portfolios, just to give you that level of detail. So, in your mind, you should be thinking, this is a lot, right? This is a lot. It's a new conversation. You heard me talk about last fall, and you might remember this, new paradigm ahead. It's a whole new discussion. But the discussion centers around teachers. So you're going to hear me talk about, as we move forward, that we're talking about teachers. This is the charge that we've been given. This is where we want to retain. We want to retain all our staff, but our focus has been about teachers. So in moving forward, keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, so let's delve into having that little bit of background into what we are bringing to you tonight. And this is part one. We're going to talk about performance and performance levels. In this model, you'll see that there are 3 different levels of performance for teachers: level 1, level 2, and level 3. This new system and what we're bringing here tonight, over time, will actually categorize teachers, so to speak, or recognize them for where they are growing and where they're achieving in our district. And so as we look at this slide, we'll see that at the first level is what we are defining as an RISD developing teacher. The second level is distinguished teacher, and the third level is high performing teacher. And we're going to delve into some of this, so I want to just go over this slide very briefly. And you'll see that at level 1, basically the components are T-tests. Is a teacher performing where we want them to perform on the state evaluation system? At level 2, have they achieved a high level on that evaluation? And then at level 3, we have had a conversation about our RISD, highest performing people. How are we recognizing them? How are we retaining them? And so that will be level 3 that I'll talk about tonight. So let's delve into level 1. You heard me say that at level 1, we're really looking at the state evaluation system, keeping in mind that the state is saying, caution, we want to honor that this is about growth. So we want to keep that level 1 intact and give teachers credit for moving through that state evaluation system. And so at this level, we are saying, is the teacher at least developing in all of the areas of the evaluation system? And that no area falls below expectation. We're also asking the question, has the teacher identified a student learning goal And has that teacher achieved it? Have the students met that goal? And has the teacher identified in collaboration with the administrator a professional development goal, and have they achieved it? That's it. That is our developing teacher. And what that does is it complements what the state is telling us about the model itself. So let's move on to level 2. Level 2 answers the question, are we recognizing people that achieve the highest level on the state evaluation system? And level 2 answers that question. Because at level 2, we will begin to recognize and to compensate and to differentiate compensation for people who achieve, for individuals, for teachers that achieve the highest level on the evaluation system. What we do not want to encourage is misreporting, where suddenly every single indicator is distinguished, because looking at this rubric, that's not possible. It is a rigorous rubric. So we will set some standard that no less, or that we will have an identified number of indicators that have to be distinguished. And this is also an opportunity for us to begin to add those things that we as a district believe are important. So let me give you just a few examples. Let me flip here. Attendance. We know that attendance can impact student achievement. This is where we can set a bar for attendance. This is where we can begin to credit teachers and to recognize them for all the individual professional development that they engage in above and beyond what the district requires. That teacher who's motivated is a lifelong learner. And what we also want to ensure is that this is also sustainable. So we know that not every teacher in RISD is going to meet this standard, and we're looking at about 15% of our staff, roughly 380 to 400 teachers in our district. And we would need to have some validation process. So that would mean individuals, someone with an HR in collaboration with another department, ensuring that those results are truly accurate and they reflect the teacher's performance. At level 3, which is our highest performing teachers, RISD high performing teacher, this is where we find the creme de la creme. And what we're looking at is having individuals self-identify that I want to achieve this. They set that goal at the beginning of the year. They visit with their administrator. They communicate to HR. And we begin that work of reaching that goal of high performing teacher. This is where we can truly begin to add all of the things that define an RISD teacher. I think about our RISD teacher profile and setting standards based on that profile. I think about our I values. Is our teacher innovative, inclusive? Do they go about their work with integrity, inspiration? The sky's the limit here. But this is also where we can begin to include measurements that sometimes are a little bit more debatable. For example, we can begin to look at even student perceptions of teachers, student surveys. We know that our most effective teachers are some of our beloved teachers by our students and parents and community. We can begin, and I'm not saying that that's what we'll include, but these are the kinds of things that we can begin to develop. Okay? So that ends our part 1. Our part 2 is going to talk about the role in compensation, and then the third part will talk about career pathways. So if I can take some questions, if you have any, about just the performance levels or comments.
I just had one so far, Dr. Medina, and that was, I noticed one of the things that you were considering for the distinguished teacher is number of years of service or teaching experience, and I was just kind of wondering what the thought process was behind that.
Okay. So when we look at this instrument and we talk about retention and wanting people to aspire and to develop goals within our district, it would follow that they stay with us and achieve a goal over time. So that's one piece. And we also know that the new system, in and of itself, coming into a new district, we know that a new teacher will need to enculturate and acclimate into the new system, and we know that it'll not happen likely within the first year. That is, but I will also say, Mr. Oliver, that that's also been something that's been brought to our attention as, talk to us about why. And our conversation centers on, we want it to be about retention and getting teachers to stay in our district. Listen, if you are here for 2 years, you can go to this next level. If you're here for 3 years, you can go to this next level. Hopefully encourage them and motivate them to stay and to aspire to reach those additional levels. And certainly none of that is set in stone. These are just examples that have been a part of our conversation.
Mr. One?
Thank you. Dr. Medina, the one question I have is regarding the minimum criteria. It says at least 2 pre-identified professional development plan goals. What exactly would those goals be, and are they graduate course studies or are they different?
Okay, so the goal setting process in this new system, basically what occurs, let me give you a little background, is the teachers engage in a self-reflective process and they self-evaluate on this new evaluation system. And based on their self-evaluation and feedback from their administrator, they identify the lowest areas or the areas that they have not moved through the rubric, and they set goals centered around those. So they can truly vary. It could be additional professional development opportunities that mean attend a particular workshop or implement differentiated instruction in the classroom. It could range, but it really is centered on the rubric. When we get to that distinguished level, because that's the frame that you're referring to, what we could do at this distinguished level is that we could begin to add additional components to the state's base. The state is not mandating how many student learning objectives, how many professional development plan goals. They're just saying it's part of the component. Here's where in Richardson we could say one could be personal, one could be professional. We could add and make it our own at this point.
Mr. Bowman?
Thank you, Dr. Medina. I want to, get a better understanding on the student growth piece of T-test and what, our design of that has been to date, or how we're thinking about it. I heard you say there's multiple allowable pieces of how that can be built, but I guess I want to understand your thinking around where that piece sits.
To refer back to the 4 options that the state is giving, you'll remember that I said student learning objective, where you identify an objective that the students will improve on. The other was portfolio, another was value added, and then pre and post test. So basically, first of all, what I do want to say is that I remind you again that that's not coming until 17 and 18. And that is for various reasons. For those of us that have been keeping up with what's going on at the federal level, there's a reauthorization of NCOB. And the No Child Left Behind Act, one of the components of it is requiring districts to use student growth measures such as value added. And value added is an area that has been, it's a way of measuring students that's produced in many different ways. I don't want to get too deep into it, but there's been a lot of discussion about whether it's a reliable, and not so much reliable, but how we should use that kind of information. And so what we're waiting from the state and from the federal government is to decide whether the government is going to do away with that component altogether. So that's one piece that you need to be, which is the reason that the state has moved to putting it off till 17 and 18. So that, we don't know what that will really look like at the end of the day. We just know that it is a component as it currently exists today. I will also say that in the distinguished level and the high-performing teacher levels, we could make that what we want it to be, regardless of what the state says. If the state decides that student learning objectives will not be a part of it, or value added will not be a part of it, at the distinguished and high-performing levels, that's where we as a district could set goals in student performance in whatever area that we decided, to tackle and to focus on.
One quick follow-up, if I could. As I hear student learning objectives, value added, portfolio, pre and post, I mean, that sounds like very individualized goals, student by student, as opposed to, the total test grade for my class was a. So that's how it sounds to me, but I want to verify or make sure that that's.
They certainly can be, but the models that we're currently familiar with and that have been presented to us, it's by class, setting, identifying goals by class. So for example, in my class, the area that my students most struggle with, or the areas that I want to see my students most improve on, and it could fall on any range of the spectrum. It doesn't mean that they're underperforming, it could just mean that this is an area that I want to improve.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bono?
My questions are more, I guess, to kind of step back instead of the detail here. I have two questions, I guess. One, would good teachers celebrate this? Number one. And number two, would the measurements, because it's more highly measured than what we've got now, which is not necessarily bad, but would those measurements be understandable by the teachers so that it would be motivational instead of demotivational? Those are kind of two strikes on that.
Okay. Well, actually, and Mrs. Bono, you were actually a part of, and want to thank you for your work on that on the ad hoc committee. So, and certainly you've had the opportunity to hear some of the feedback, and so I appreciate that question. Throughout this entire process, we have been very inclusive, ensured that we're hearing from teachers, and that we've expanded the number of teachers, and of course, we had the teacher focus group as well. And here, we went through an entire activity of the kinds of things that they found. We went through a SWOT analysis. And with the ad hoc committee, we said, tell us about the strengths that you see in this. Tell us about the weaknesses and other opportunities and threats. Here are some of the things they said. A strength, it's an evaluation system that determines compensation and communicates the value of performance and recognizes and retains higher performing teachers. These are comments from teachers. And it's an evaluation system that's differentiated and incents people to grow. It's an evaluation that has a phase-in model, allows individuals to gain familiarity and allows the district to define the most important criteria. Let me give you just another one. It's an evaluation system that communicates the value and and compensates individuals for professional development, meaning that it's important. And so we're hearing some really positive pieces, for it. I will tell you, having been a principal and having been a teacher, one of the things that I would hear from teachers is this sense of, I'm a hardworking, I'm a successful teacher, and our current system compensates everyone exactly the same, regardless of the different levels of performance. So I know that this evaluation system, this model, would incent them and would also validate and confirm their thinking.
Okay, well, I want you to keep going. What were the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? You gave us the good side. Were there things that people didn't like about it?
Well, let me give you a couple of each.
Okay.
Okay, so some weaknesses. Student learning objectives. If they are not validated properly, or if they are not rigorous enough, they can be subjective and they can result in less reliable outcomes. Transparency there. And that's why I have the phase-in, and I'm going to talk about that in in just a minute. Two, I promise two. The compensation system may be viewed as complex and difficult to communicate if it's not explained clearly.
And actually, you reflected beautifully, that was the reflection that I had, was that we were able to attend a session at TASB, and it was a panel talking about T-tests and rollouts, and there were districts who had used SLO, and they talked about how extraordinarily difficult it is to get right, and how much time it took for them to iterate on it with their professionals to really understand how those SLOs could be used. So I get that there's a full menu of options that we could use to look at student growth, but so I think your comment, your teacher's comments are spot on there. And then just a clarification for me, is everything within, and thank you for your description of how it's different. Got it, I was able to follow that, so thank you. PDOS to T-test. The three pieces, are they weighted equally within that?
So when I get to the compensation system, the phases, I'll talk about that.
So from observation, goal setting, and student growth.
Those will be weighted differently. At least that's one of the things we could do. They could be the same, they could be weighted differently.
Oh, so we have the opportunity to do that. The state isn't.
The state does not tie evaluation to compensation at all.
Oh, no, sorry. I just meant like within an overall evaluation score, is it a third, or is it something?
There's no end. We as a district will do that to determine compensation as we have in the past, but the state does not mandate or dictate how that will be done. It's complete local autonomy at that point. Okay.
Mrs. Greenholm.
My question is a little bit of a follow-up to Mr. Bono's, but it's like the timing sense of what's going to happen. You referenced several times, if the state decides such and such, then we could do such and such. When do you expect that information or decisions from the state so that you have the ability to build it into the complicated system that is going to take some time to get right?
Well, tomorrow, first of all, at the federal level, the reauthorization, Every Child Succeeds Act, I believe it is, goes, I believe, to the Senate tomorrow.
Right.
And we'll know about the student growth piece tomorrow. So that will probably inform what the state will tell us, and we'll probably hear something about that in January. But Mrs. Greenhall, our phase-in, which I'll talk about, takes all of that into consideration. And you'll hear me talk about that.
Dr. Medina, the only question I have, and it could be a question and or an observation, is as we look at performance levels, I'm building off of some of the questions of my colleagues, which is, teachers who are performing at a good level, at an acceptable level. I think it's important that they feel valued and know that if you are meeting requirements, you're doing an outstanding job. I mean, is that a part of this matrix and standards?
And yes, it is. And that's why it was so important to keep the state model intact, and for us to ensure that when we move forward, and when you move forward in making budget recommendations, that my recommendation is that you think about that level 1 and what would be the maximum amount that a level 1 teacher might be able to make. And then we have discussions about how we want to reward and compensate the RISD distinguished and RISD high performing teacher. And so we'll continue to have those discussions. Okay. So let's talk about the phase-ins. They move a little quicker. So basically we're looking at 3 stages. At the first phase will occur next year, it can occur next year, at 16-17. And basically what we're looking at for next year is strictly considering, for compensation purposes, is the T-test rubric. What is happening in the classroom? And the other components, student learning objectives and professional development plans, goal setting, that we engage in that process to some extent, and that we provide it as a report only. So why? It's very important that we get this right. It's very important that we understand this new rubric. It's very important that as a district we analyze and study this rubric and say, what does this mean in our district? Before we begin to even complicate it with anything else. So the phase in year 1, 16-17, the compensation we are looking at just the rubric itself. Now, in terms of student learning objectives, there's, the state is providing 4 options for student growth. Student learning objectives, there's all kinds of models of student learning objectives. And so as a district, we would need to decide what model reflects what we value in our district. So it's, in terms of student learning objectives, it may not be a district-wide rollout. We may need to continue to study that until the state expects us to fully flush it out and we hear from the federal level what that's going to look like. But we don't want to lose momentum by what we've learned in the pilot this year and what we've learned from TAP and TIF 4 as well. In phase 2, you also will see additional compensation opportunities, and if you could just pause for a moment, we'll pause a little bit to talk about the SES differential. In phase 2, which will be 17 and 18, when we hear from the feds, from the federal government, and also when we hear at the state level, that is when we want to take the whole state system, whatever they tell us is now required, and make all of it a part to inform compensation. Rubric, instructional practice, SLO, student growth, and then as well professional development plan goals. All of those 3 components at the minimum standard of 1 SLO, 1 professional development plan goal, at basic level. That's phase 3. Phase 2. At phase 3, which would occur beginning in 18 and 19, after teachers have had and gained familiarity, as have we would implement and begin to compensate individuals who aspire and achieve the distinguished and high-performing teacher levels. And that's rolling everything in, and that's when we begin to set different standards for student learning objectives as well as professional development plan goals. So those are the basic phases. Phase 1, looking at it a little bit deeper. As we said, we're going to expect that our teachers have the at least developing standard, which means that no indicator falls below developing, and that any board-approved compensation, they would be eligible for it in year 1, solely based on that rubric. Again, we want to get good at it. And then there'll be an opportunity for an SES differential, which I'll talk about as well. So let's talk about that differential before we move on. When we look at our data, and this probably, you might say, well, we might have guessed that, or maybe we know that. When we look at our data and we see how teachers have fared on PDAS historically, we know that there's been some level of inflation in how they end up. We have a lot of exceeds expectations, teachers that have capped. When we really break that down, what we notice is that many of the teachers that have capped tend to be at schools where the economically disadvantaged, the population of the economically disadvantaged students is lower than it is where it's higher. When we look at the extreme levels of even 90% and above, we don't see so many exceeds expectations. We see more proficient. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we compensate for that? And that's where this discussion of differential comes into this discussion. But in addition to that, we also know when we talk about retention and when we talk about attracting and recruiting, the schools that we have the most difficult time attracting and oftentimes retaining are these schools with high levels of economically disadvantaged students. So what we are bringing to you is this idea of how can we compensate, how can we account, for some of those differences. Hence the SES differential. And so what we're looking at is identifying some bright line type or some sort of threshold of it could be 90%, it could be 75%, but identifying something that can be sustained, because we don't want to say we can afford it next year but not the following year. We want it to be sustainable. In our studies, districts have accomplished this in two different ways. One way that they do it is they provide a stipend, and the stipends have ranged anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. In our district, we have done stipends at our top schools. The other way that they accomplish this is by adding numerical points to the evaluation system. And what we are considering and what we would like to move forward with is some form of stipend. Okay? So that's the SES differential. Things to take away from the SES differential is that it would only be available in the fall following the teacher's year of experience to ensure that that teacher stays in that campus the following year. And it's not just about getting a differential just for being there. You have to meet the performance standards as well. So it's setting expectations, for that as well. So moving into phase 2. In phase 2, this is where we can begin to differentiate, because here's where we will consider all of the different components of t-tests and begin to look at, we talked about differentials as well. So we said, can some of these components be weighted differently? Yes. You heard me talk about the rubric. You heard me talk about the professional development plan goals and student learning objectives. Here's where we could, and this mirrors somewhat what we have done in our TAP schools, where what occurs in the classroom, the teacher practice, is weighted at about 50%. The professional development goals and attainment of those goals at about 30%, and student learning objectives at about 20%. So, and that's not set in stone. However, this is one idea. So what does that mean? That means that if we are talking at performance level 1, if a teacher meets every aspect of the developing standard, that means that they could be eligible for 50% of what the board approves. So hypothetically, let's say that the board approves a 4% raise. Let's keep it simple. 50% would be 2% for meeting expectations on the rubric. If they meet their professional development plan goals, that would be additional 30% of a board-approved raise, which would be that additional quarter, and then the full compensation if they met all three. And so do you begin to see how it's differentiated based on the performance levels? Okay. And of course, then you would have opportunities for additional compensation with the SES differential. When you look at phase 3, here's where everything is completely included. The distinguished teacher, as well as high-performing teacher compensation. And this is where we can add above and beyond what would be compensated within the t-test. So hypothetically, we could, if the board approves a 3% at the phase 1 level, phase 2 for RSD distinguished teacher could be an additional 0.5% of a raise. And a high-performing teacher could be an additional 1%. And that way, an RISD high-performing teacher could reach as much as 4.5, depending on what that base was. But this is how we can layer, above the t-test model. So when you consider the performance levels and you consider the compensation levels, this is pretty much what we're projecting. We really started our work last year defining why are we even doing this? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And we talked about employer of choice, destination district, retaining and rewarding and recognizing excellence. And then we started the whole communication. We did our committee, we did our research. We identified those opportunities. We moved into this year, more stakeholder input. I think I was counting the different surveys, 4 to 5, as many as 6 different small surveys that we've done, and focus groups and so forth. So we've engaged in that work. It brings us to this year. We're continuing to solicit feedback. We've developed the model. We've expanded our feedback to the ad hoc committee, and beginning to look at numbers as well and planning for sustainability. And hopefully we can finalize a model this year as we move into next year so that we can see board approval. And then I've talked about 17, 18, and 18, 19. We're really looking at a 5-year implementation. implementation plan. So before I move into part 3, are there any questions about part 2? Mr. Lynn?
Thank you, Ms. Cash. Dr. Medina, can we go back to the proposed SES differential?
Sure.
My question about this is, I recognize that, schools have individual challenges, and not all of them have the same challenges. My question, though, is how does this translate from primary to secondary? Because we have many more primary schools than we have secondary schools. So how, is there a ratio that works here, or how exactly do you envision that?
That's a good question. We can approach this from different perspectives, and certainly our study has not ended here. I want to remind you that we have been very strategic at the secondary level about attracting and recruiting and compensating areas of high need. We have stipends for LOTE, we have stipends for math, we have stipends for science, we have stipends for dual credit, we have stipends. Just, you name it, I could probably list 8 to 10 ways that we've targeted attracting teachers at the secondary level. Some individuals might say, well, it's not enough. Can we continue to target more? We certainly can. But I want you to know that we've already begun that work and have been engaged in that work at the secondary level. With the exception of bilingual stipends, that's pretty much been limited there at the elementary level. We also know that the retention numbers, because a lot of this discussion started with the discussion about retention, the turnover at the elementary campuses, we've struggled more there. We've identified those tend to be the campuses that exceed our district percentages. But that doesn't go to say that we can't come up with a different standard. Because we do know that I can think of some campuses right now that would benefit from attracting teachers to a campus where we want to attract them and retain them. So just because we've attached this to economically disadvantaged doesn't mean that we can't also include at the secondary level mobility rates, teacher turnover rates at the secondary level. We can have a different discussion, but at the elementary level it seems very appropriate to look at the economically disadvantaged percentages.
Thank you.
Dr. Keelan?
Thanks. Dr. Medina, I also had a couple follow-up questions for you on the SES differential. I heard you say that your preferred method was a stipend. Can you tell us why?
Sure. So we've had different discussions about this. It's kind of a philosophical, also a sustainability kind of question. When you add percentage points to an evaluation, and then that determines a percentage in terms of compensation increase. When you do a percentage, that percentage is compounded over time. And it's always a part of the budget. When you do a stipend, it's not a permanent piece. If we ever reach the point where we believe that we could not sustain doing a differential, it's very difficult to reduce a teacher's salary than it is to say at this time, when we approached challenges with our budget, we addressed stipends. We lowered stipends, eliminated some stipends in some cases, and so it provides the district, it provides you the flexibility truly of being able to increase or remove and so forth. Mr. Hargrove, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
That's helpful, thank you. And then one other thing, I heard you mention on that it would be in the fall, and that it would be based on whether or not they met the appropriate performance standards for the T-test rubric. I'm wondering about the performance standards for the campus.
We could certainly look at that. We could definitely look at the campus and say, did they meet whatever identified standards that we had? And the beautiful thing about this is that on a year-to-year basis, the areas that we look at for achieving distinguished and high teaching performance, we can meet those standards every year based on what our goals are for student performance every year. And so that's the beautiful thing about being able to do this above and beyond the state model.
I guess my reflection there is I'm not sure the kind of community support we would have in paying out additional stipend money for a campus that wasn't meeting their goals. And so I would like there to be some sort of a way to make sure that we haven't lost sight of the larger objectives. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kuhn. Mr. Oliver.
On that, I mean, I guess to me, first of all, I really appreciate the thought that's gone into this, and appreciate, you know, we've been asking for a long time for some kind of differentiated compensation, and I think the way in which you guys have brought this forward, it makes a lot of sense to me. I like the balance between the rubric and the development and the learning objectives. So I appreciate that. I just want to voice my support for the SES differential. I think that's a great idea. And I had the same question about the stipend, and I understand your logic there, so that makes some sense to me. I guess whether it's an SES differential tied to school performance or an SLO goal that is tied to a class, I guess my concern there is tying compensation to goals for groups of people, because that, just our experience over the past several years of standardized testing has shown me that the behavior that ensues then is that you try to get to the lowest common denominator of getting the lower performing kids to that minimum standard. And so that would be my only concern with group-oriented goals being a part of that, whether it was for the SES differential or the student learning objectives. And I hope that we can find a way to structure our student learning objectives that somehow in some way can try to recognize individual growth for each of our students. Because when we start talking about compensation, I mean, it's, you get laser focus. I mean, we already have it, but I think it kind of goes to another level when you start talking about compensation. And so that to me is the way that we structure that SLO is the big question, the big variable that has the most amount of leverage here in terms of whether or not we get what we want out of this. And so are there ways of doing that in some way kind of measure individualized student growth so that we don't kind of shoot ourselves in the foot by tying it to a group performance?
So let me clarify student learning objectives and our history that we've had with it and what we can do there. And I'll give you just an example. We're a class, and I find an area where we need to improve. Our students need to improve. We have had an experience with pre and post assessments where I assess all of you on a concept at the beginning of the year. Teach. At the end of the year, I assess again, did I reach my goal as a class? And what we could do is set benchmarks to say, for you to reach the student learning objectives, 70% of your students have to demonstrate mastery, or 80%, or 90%. That's where we could begin, while we're looking at individual growth, we could set the standards at that level.
Just one more point, and I think that there's some merit in that. It's just that my concern are the 20 to 30% that we're gonna do well regardless. So what have we done for them, and how are we measuring whether or not we've moved the needle and given them a year of growth? So I think that's the part that's going to be hard, but I think it's worth looking into and focusing on.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. Mrs. Bono.
I also want to say appreciation for especially your slow and careful implementation of this. At first, it feels like a long time. When I first saw this, I'm like, why are we taking so long? But, kudos to you for doing it as such. But I do have a short-term question. Just in terms of the implementation how would you think, the number of teachers that get the full compensation impact, how would it be different in 16, 17 than in 15, 16?
So in terms of, well, it's difficult to speak about 15, 16. I don't know how many teachers we're still under PEAS this year. So there are two different systems, so it's difficult to compare. We know that currently, Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, is Barbara Parker over here? Was it approximately 98, 99% of our teachers meeting? Currently, 98, 99% of our teachers are meeting the standard to receive a board-approved raise. We do know that in schools like our TAP schools that have implemented, this model, and I thought I had my data here with me, but Barbara, is it in the 70s and 80s? Approximately.
I think probably higher.
A little bit higher. It's not as significant. It's not as we know that schools that differentiate the compensation that in our experience in TAP schools, and I apologize, certainly can get you that data, but we know that in schools where there's some accountability for student growth, teacher objectives, not as many teachers have met that, those standards. When we looked at the data, there truly is a bell curve in the performance when we look back at our TAP schools and our TIP schools. So answer your question, there will be a difference. We expect there to be.
The bell curve does make sense to me.
The bell curve does make sense. And that's where we need to have stages of validation of performance.
And my other question is, probably just because I'm not as experienced at this as some of you, but the professional development, when it becomes if it were to become 30% of the weighting, how rigorous is that? Can you give me an example or a feel for what that might be, what that might look like for an individual teacher?
So at the performance level 1, we're looking at one goal. Okay? And truly, we don't want to look at any more than 2 to 3 goals if we really want to make them meaningful and attainable and so forth. Same thing with student learning objectives. And at performance level 1, at performance level 2, what we could do is identify other areas of professional development, not just that you met this one goal, but how you use that information. Do you participate in actually developing other teachers? Do you provide professional development? Do you exceed the number of professional development hours required by the district? We can set whatever standards that we want to make it as rigorous as we want it to be.
Could you give me an example of what that one professional development goal might look like?
Okay. Geez, the pressure of one. It could be, let's say that the students struggle in a particular concept. I'm going to ask some help here. Is Vicki or Brenda?
I'm here.
Brenda, give us an example of an area where you've seen a teacher, or Melanie as well, struggle that might be a...
Let me jump in. One example might be if we're talking about instructional practices and looking at questioning strategies for a particular unit of study or particular content area. So the type of questioning that the teacher provides, they attend professional development to really emphasize this is the importance of, for example, reading the selection, preparing your questions that you plan to answer of the students ahead of time, and then implementing that accordingly throughout the rest of the unit. That would be just one example where you could set a goal for yourself in the classroom. The administrator or someone else could come in to observe and scribe how you ask the questions. Did you ask them in a way that really facilitates the students asking more questions or providing high-level answers? So it's just one way that professional development tied to the unit of study is really observable in the classroom.
Thank you, and I'm sorry. That is much more. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Goodson.
Thank you, Kris. The other piece is that the thing about professional development plan goals, the critical part of that process is identifying evidence that will demonstrate that you've achieved that goal. So it's all about the evidence as well. When I come to observe you, when I ask your students, when I plan with you, there's multiple ways, and so part of that goal setting process, a critical piece is also identifying the evidence that's going to be used to And that's where the rigor comes in, is not just what you want to improve on, but how are you going to measure that and what evidence, and it has to be agreed upon evidence at the early part of the process. And that's where some of the rigor comes in.
Thank you, Mrs. Bono. Mr. Bono?
Thank you, Ms. Caston. Dr. Medina, follow up on the SES piece. So I want to dive in a little bit on your comment about the differential between teachers rated exceeds expectations on certain campuses versus others. And I'm sorry, I'm fuzzy on the current components of our current evaluation system. So can you give me the 10,000-foot view on how the student growth piece, or whatever the equivalent is measured in our current system?
So our current system domain has 8 domains. The last domain, the 8th domain, speaks to student growth, student performance, but it's captured very broadly. You know, in general, how is student performance? And so the evaluator comments and gives the teacher feedback. Also, what's included in there is campus performance, how did the campus rate and fare. And so that's what's included in our current evaluation system. The current evaluation system has 8 components, like I said, 8 domains. And basically it's based on, although you're considering the entire school year, a big part of that is really what occurs in the classroom. Truly, it's based on a 45-minute observation, and I don't want to misspeak, but it's really a snapshot in time for the most part, although we encourage our administrators to look at their performance holistically. It is one 45-minute observation. This new system, from what we're learning, will have multiple observations, will have multiple measures, and things that have to really be evaluated throughout the entire year. And so the rigor of that aspect of the instrument is what's really different.
So I guess naturally, I think in the old system, with it being a broader measure, it makes me wonder if, naturally some of our campuses with lower socioeconomic, higher low socioeconomic percentages have some challenges on, on state tests. I'm just interested in your perspective on, given that it's a broad measure, how that might be impacting some of that score differential versus current rating differential versus,
And it certainly may. I think there might be a lot of different factors. I'll share with you that sometimes it's challenging to tell a teacher they're not going to get a raise. And sometimes that motivates. When the rubric is not rigorous enough, and that there is no accountability, sometimes, or limited accountability, or a certain level of evidence. In this new rubric, it's an evidence-based system. And to move through that continuum, you have to demonstrate and provide various samples of evidence.
Greenhalgh?
I just wanted to echo Mr. Oliver's concern again that in some of the systems that are in place now in other places, one of the big struggles that you really see with some of those systems is that growth at the top, that space where you've got a veteran teacher with significant years of service and is a very high-performing teacher, and that there's not enough room in that growth for them to actually benefit from the differentiated model. So it's really important to run those dynamics from whatever you do every which way, to really look and make sure that there isn't somebody in the system that gets penalized when they really are following the growth and they are achieving that, but there are a certain place in the system where they get stuck and it doesn't value them, because you can really end up with some high-performing teachers that don't benefit from that and when they deserve that opportunity.
Dr. Kim?
Thanks. I think building on what you just said, Ms. Greenhalgh, I go back to the comment that Ms. Bono had. I think the lens around would our high-performing teachers celebrate this is excellent. Because I think when you get to the answer where that's absolutely 100% yes, then go with that model and run with it, right? We like it. And then along those lines, I'm wondering, my understanding of some of these programs where they've rolled out in other places, teachers were highly engaged in the goal setting process. And I'm just wondering how you guys have considered rolling that into, or if you consider rolling into how the teachers would set some of these goals. And then just a secondary observation. This is, I love the way that it focuses principals as instructional leaders, but this is going to be, if I'm understanding it properly, incredibly time intensive for them, because we've just expanded the scope of opportunities and the frequency with which they will be interacting with teachers. And so 2 parts to my question, I'm sorry, I'm giving you 2 at once. But the part B is, what are we doing about principal readiness to take on these additional responsibilities? So if you could address those 2 things.
Part of that readiness is building in time. And that's one of the reasons that we have the phase-in process of looking just at the rubric first and then looking at student learning objectives, professional development, goal setting. That's, one piece. In terms of readiness, we are taking, our next step is next week, we're actually going to start with our central level administrators and train them on the system through Region 10. And then assistant and principals and assistant principals, all our campus level administrators will be trained on the rubric in the system later this spring. And then all teachers throughout the state will be trained at some point either during the summer or in early part of August. And so we've already scheduled a date to train teachers. To speak to your point about the level of commitment and more, it's very comprehensive. That's correct. We have been hearing from individuals, from districts that are participating in that particular pilot, that it is time intensive. But I also want to say that it's also validating because the number of observations and walkthroughs are what good monitoring already includes. Being in the classroom, being out in the building, observing instruction in every classroom. And to your point about goal setting, absolutely, this model of goal setting is teacher driven. Teacher self-assesses, teachers looking at their individual goals, collaborating with the principal, with their supervisor they're evaluating, and collaboratively identifying a goal. So there's a lot of teacher-driven pieces in this new system. In the goal setting process, as well as the student learning objectives, the teacher studying their students, identifying where they know the students need to be.
Hey, Dr. Medina, a couple of just observations from these 2 portions of the presentation. Discussion at the beginning of the meeting, you asked us to reflect on 2 things, and correct me if I'm wrong. Are we doing the right things? And then the second one was are we going about this the right way? And I think what we've heard so far, and board members, please feel free to weigh in, is that that there is a consensus from the board that we are doing the right things and things that we have connected well to, especially tonight with the SES differential. There was some observations about secondary versus primary. Performance levels for teachers and valuing all teachers at all levels of success. A leadership capacity, that making sure that our principals have the capacity and the time to be good instructional leaders on campus. I think you've heard a lot of ideas, as we say, going about this the right way. There's been some ideation on the part of the board, and I think you can take that as encouragement to continue to do a full 360 on the initiatives, and that you have the board's support for the work that is being done. The one thing that I will ask, of you or Dr. Stone or Dr. Wagner, or certainly any of the members of your staff, is that you've asked us for information that you need to continue to push these initiatives forward. Is there any further information you need from board members? Is there any clarity that you need? Is there any information from us? Are you clear on the direction and the perspective that you've heard tonight? Because this is important work, and we realize that and
I
appreciate
appreciate that opportunity to comment on that. I think what's really important right now is that we have begin to plan for next year. Because whether this is the model or any of the pieces in this model or what you approve eventually, or if you don't, we have to compensate our teachers some way, somehow on this new system. And we have to identify how we're going to do that, regardless of whether this model, pushes forth, goes forth or not. I would really, truly would like to know, from the board, again, it sounds to me like we're working on the right work, and that with, I am going to try to get more feedback from what our higher performing teachers value this as well, just because that's part of the right way, and continue to get teacher feedback. So I think what I would do at this point is begin in a very comprehensive way to communicate this to our teachers, to our principals, and getting some face time. I've already started discussions with Kara, Mrs. Womack, and so that we can begin to communicate with our teachers and begin to get some feedback, some very critical, feedback as well.
Great. I think you hear unspoken affirmation. So
that's what I need to hear.
Excellent. And so with that, Dr. Medina, you'll head into the third part.
So we talked about leadership capacity, and that was a good segue into leadership capacity. Is this idea of career pathways? Career pathways, in the sense in how we are identifying with career pathways, is this: is we want to recognize those individuals who are, someone might say, passing the torch, keepers of the flame, people who are growing other teachers who are building capacity amongst our teachers. And why? Because I know that I alone can impact only this many students. When I impact another teacher, we impact more students, and so on and so forth. So this model is about extending our circle of influence, extending our reach, and giving teachers the opportunity to be recognized through defined roles, giving them those leadership opportunities, those that aspire to develop as leaders, and also retaining them and compensating them for moving through these career pathways. So that's really what career pathways, this is how we are defining career pathways. It's a culture of opportunity. And we've taken that concept from elsewhere, but it's building that culture of opportunity for our folks. So what you have is the career pathways model, and you see how our differentiated way of recognizing teachers is embedded in this career pathways. We have teachers that aspire to be the best teacher. They love the classroom and they want to continue to get better. So this builds and recognizes them growing within that teacher, what I'm going to call column or level. And you can see that they can move through level 1, level 2, and level 3. Then you have those teachers that begin to expand their reach and start influencing and mentoring aspiring teachers, new teachers, and how do we compensate them and recognize them and give them this defined role. Some of these are already compensated. Some of these are not. Okay? So then you begin to see how campus specialists, currently, for example, the red column, this is where they become instructional coaches, different kinds of specialists, and their reach and their influence begins to broaden. And so what we want to do and what we're proposing is compensating them to also retain them. Currently, these individuals are paid as teachers that assume additional responsibilities. They might have additional work days that they work, but what we want to do is compensate them and recognize them for what they are doing and building capacity in our district. Then it moves through the district level, and we have district level types of individuals that I'm going to share with you. They hold a lot of capacity in our district, and they are the people, and oftentimes that's where some of the cherry picking happens, as someone might say, because these are our top performing teachers who gain this expertise, but we compensate them as teachers. So what can we do to reward them and compensate them for the work that they do? And then we debated whether administration should be in there, but we kept it on there because we do have people that want to move into that level. And so we added additional pieces in there to ensure that we are also, this is also a succession planning tool. This is about ensuring future success of our district. And so when you look at administration, you'll see some in there, and my eyes are failing me in this moment, department interns. There was a time in our district when we had interns in curriculum, or in finance, or in HR, different departments for individuals who aspire to someday assume these roles, to provide an opportunity for people to have these experiences and expand that within our district. So this is the career pathways model, and it's teachers, it's recognizing teachers, for growing in those ways, and that's pretty much the extent of it. So, and unless you have any questions about, let me take some questions about that third part. Are there any questions about career pathways?
Just a comment that I think that's one of the most exciting pieces in it. Year after year we see the truly gifted teacher who doesn't feel like they have any option to rise in the system but to leave the classroom, and to have an opportunity now to create that option for teachers who that is their true passion and that is their true gift, to stay there and still be compensated and rise through the system in the ranks and be treated fairly is a real gift to the classroom and to this district.
I just had a clarification, Dr. Medina, like under teacher leader, I'm not seeing anything that's called a master teacher. Am I not tagging that to what you guys call it internally?
We had those titles, master teacher, they did exist. They've slowly over time.
Is that a TAP model thing?
And yes, we did have under the master with the TAP model.
Okay.
That completely went away, as did our collaborative learning leaders and collaborative learning facilitators.
So key me into what would be a master teacher on this list.
A master teacher, in my mind, is someone that was inclusive of all content areas. Truly what I would call an instructional coach. An instructional coach could be assigned to any particular content area. In our district, we have instructional coaches that capture all of it, and they're used in different capacities at different campuses. And then we have some math specialists that specialize just in math, as in with reading, as in with science as well. And at the secondary level, I believe there's a social studies, that's not one. Well, there's lots of different ones at the district level, yes.
Mr. One?
Thank you. Dr. Medina, I'm looking through your graph here, and can you tell me if advancement through this is predicated on post-secondary, master, graduate, doctoral work? Is that how we're looking at teachers who want to advance in their careers?
We know that that's the case at the administrative level.
Right.
So to hold it, you have to have that advanced degree, master's degree. But at the other levels, no.
Okay, so the other levels aren't, you don't have to have a
That's correct.
advanced degree in order to move forward.
Doesn't mean that we don't have to. It just means currently that's not our practice.
Okay, all right, thank you, that clears up.
So just, and of course this is not an exhaustive list of just things for us to think about. There are financial implications with this, and they come in just 3 examples. Is that every year there might be a loss in funding. We don't know what the state will do at any given point and with any plan that we have, but also enrollment changes. Enrollment can decrease when we anticipated additional funding, perhaps we don't get that. We also know that from visiting with all of the different districts that we have, is that the more we visited, the more we realized the enormity of the responsibilities associated. So when you think about validating high-performing teachers and HR committing to walkthroughs and observations and review of evidence, for even the top 10% or even the top 15%, you're talking at 500-600 reviews. Currently, our staff within HR, and that's just one of several examples, where staff is going to be needed to completely flush out and completely develop. Think about the communication. If we want to do it the way it needs to be done, going about the right way, dedicated staff, to be focused specifically on that work. So additional staff we know is going to be needed as well. We talked about the rigor of SLOs. That was a perfect example. Someone that brought the rigor of SLOs. In other districts that we have visited, they have staff dedicated to training, to developing, to providing a repository, to validating SLOs throughout the entire district. That kind of position currently doesn't exist. So those are just some examples. And then we also know that we will need to invest in software to house all of this data, to house all of this information that we currently don't have, to be able to, for reporting and analysis, data collection and reporting. We also know that this, you've heard me say, is about teachers. So what you do, this new evaluation system is not appropriate for employee types that we're currently using this about the PDAS with. Let me give you a good example. Instructional coaches or speech pathologists currently are evaluated with the PDAS instrument. This instrument is not appropriate for PDAS. So in this coming semester, Human Resources has already started developing evaluation tools for many other different types of employee types to develop this readiness. The other thing is the performance-based compensation model does not address other types of employees. It doesn't address counselors. It doesn't address instructional coaches. This is strictly classroom teachers. So we know that over time, those might be areas that we may want to look at as well. Okay? This is going to change. It's going to be a paradigm shift with the way we compensate new staff, new teachers into our district. And so we want to continue to study different ways that districts have approached that new teacher starting salary and make a recommendation that will continue to attract and continue to allow us to be competitive with other districts. And then the other piece to consider is the whole reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. The whole student growth component has been challenged at the federal and the state level, and in particular districts as well, as because of the high stakes associated with student growth, particularly value added. So as I've said before, I need a sense of, are we going to do the right things and going about it in the right way? We need to develop a communication plan that's comprehensive, and as I said, we've already started that process. We need to begin, if we are going to move in this direction, we need to secure the personnel to begin the whole flushing out and developing process of this whole model. We need to determine minimal expectations for teachers if we don't go forward with this model so that we can determine how they'll receive a compensation. Thank you. And then long-term wise is, to propose really a budget that supports both the performance-based compensation system and the careers pathways, because all of this at the end of the day has a dollar sign, at the front of it. And there are a lot of areas that you saw that were designated as to be determined. We need to start fleshing that out.
Just some comments I would like to make. I think without question the presentation tonight that you've heard, and you've done a great job, Dr. Medina, is ownership, it's commitment, it's an investment of time and engagement with our staff in this process, and it has really culminated in a year and a half's worth of work, almost 2 years now. Great comments, thoughts, reflections. I think some of the things as we continue to roll forward, we will address the issues of fairness and the issues about the secondary level that were asked, the questions that were asked about rewarding campuses that weren't meeting performance standards, the questions about can we still look at individual growth, not just a group growth. So those are things that will help us as we move forward with this. I think this is just a self-reflection. Probably your question tonight, is it motivational, and will it be something that teachers truly value? Because if it isn't, and if it doesn't do those things, and if it isn't rolled out, then we haven't accomplished our intent, because our intent really is to reward and retain the teachers who are here. So that is going to be something that we have to do very thoughtfully and carefully. I think about the presentations that we hear from Mrs. Noriega every year, and when we analyze the state system and we look at the complexity of it and the fairness of it, and this just in its in its essence, I guess at the beginning, when you think tiered compensation and career pathways, it ought to be easy, it ought to be simple. And I think tonight what you have seen is a huge investment of a very thoughtful time and reflected time in soliciting, because it's not simple and it is complex. But our whole intent through this is that it would be rewarding and that it would be motivational and that it would be accepted by staff. So thank you for your comments, your reflections. We'll include those different aspects as we continue to roll forward. At least what I've heard and what I think I've heard is we've got a green light to keep moving forward, and we're not bringing this for action tonight. This was the first step. We needed to bring this to the board to get a read and to get your thoughts before we rolled it out to a larger group. There have been many, many, many people involved in the process, but before we can really take it to campus staffs and some of the different departments, we really need your direction and thoughtfulness. So thank you for that tonight. And to the team who is here, the HR team, and to the people who have served on the task force, thank you for your time and your effort and your investment. Well done.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner. I'm going to step out for a moment. Ms. Greenhall, I apologize because you had no prior notice of this, but you have served on this board the longest for 18 years. And you've seen a lot of the work that we've done in valuing people. And if you'd like to make some comments on what you have seen and heard tonight, I would certainly like to give you that opportunity to make that, because I think you can provide a perspective that probably very few people in this room have. So before we close this out, if you'd like to make any comments, we'd certainly be open.
Well, I appreciate that. I think it's difficult in a system like education that has so many traditions to change those traditions and to update the system and to move forward. But it is something that has to happen as we progress and move forward with the job of a teacher, the job of an administrator. Those things are all different, so different than they were even 5 years ago, let alone 15 or 20 years ago. So to be progressive in that area and to be able to continue to be able to recruit and retain the brightest and sharpest young people that are going to come to us is important, but it's as important as finding a way to keep those people that have served us so well and that truly have devoted their lives here to doing what needs to be done for our kids and finding a way that values them and honors them too. So, but the world is changing, and the world of education is vastly different than it was. And it's exciting to be on the front of that and to be able to step forward and embrace that, the challenges that come with it and the struggles, because they will be there. But in addition to that, the opportunities that will come with it for the people that are going to continue to move that system forward is exciting to me.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'd also like to recognize our principals who are here tonight. We really appreciate y'all coming out and being here and being a part of this discussion, hearing it yourselves tonight. And so we appreciate all you do on behalf of your students, but your teachers as well, because you are their instructional leaders, and they attain greatness every day, in the words of Dr. Stone, because of your leadership. I'm going to propose a little housekeeping and perhaps an agenda change here for just a moment. I'm going to give the board, if you would, about 5 minutes. If you'd like to stand up, get a cup of coffee. I ask you not to leave, but we're not going to give you that much grace. And principals, if you were here to hear this part of the HR discussion tonight and you want to take this opportunity to head out and prepare for tomorrow, we certainly understand. If you're here also and you want to hear the bond update, Dr. Wagner, what I'm going to do is, if it's appropriate, I would propose that we do an agenda change and perhaps do the bond planning update next so that the principals can hear that if you choose. You will not lose points if you decide to make an exit, but we will definitely accommodate you and put your needs first. 5-minute break if we could, and we will reconvene in just a moment. I will remind everyone that we are still in session, board members, so please limit our interactions.
We're gonna have really good weather. Any bad I'm ready for a market. So we didn't go too heavy on the stars. So ready.
Hey, how are you? Is it on you, bro? Martin, I gotta stand up.
Oh, I know, but it's just something that we have.
So I wonder how the Cowboy game is going. Should I call Daddy?
Okay, so at this time, we will do a slight agenda modification. We are going to have our bond update next, and then following that, we will do a report on the non-traditional program facilities. So with that, Dr. Wagner, as we're settling in, if you would provide a perspective, please, on the bond planning update. And trustees, this is an information item only.
Okay, and this is another report that I'm excited to bring you tonight. It reflects, I think, the work that's been done to date, and also that we're in a very good place in terms of our bond planning. And if I could, just to frame up the conversation tonight, just take you briefly back to our strategic planning at the very onset of the process. If you remember last year in the spring, we started with a visioning document and also in looking at the different profiles, and probably with a laser-like focus on our graduate profile. And the question that guided our discussions up front is, what do we want for our kids? And so we had multiple meetings and facilitated meetings where we identified different projects in each of the different areas, and we Richardson. We've also met with the League of Women Voters. We've met with Rotaries, PTA boards, HOAs, exchange clubs by request. And we've also met with our large budget review team bond advisory committee on 2 different occasions, and we have 1 additional meeting at least, which we will be scheduled to meet with them to provide some feedback. We've also talked to our students. We've solicited feedback from Super SAC, and at this point in time, we have completed 3 of the 4 major feeder pattern meetings. And so what we're going to do tonight is just give you a status update. Mr. Harkerode and his staff, Trish, have really worked today to collate and gather all the feedback from the different feeder pattern groups. That's been an ongoing basis. We had some at the end of last week, and then we had a weekend, but been working very hard and very diligently. So Mr. Harkerode is going to share the comments, just kind of in themes, and some of the takeaways from the different listening tour groups. And then he's also going to talk specifically about some of the questions that have been raised about the proposed multi-purpose facilities. He's going to give you some additional information about libraries and some of those questions that have been asked, and also some of the different sources of funding that we have discussed. And then we will, after we get through that, talk about very specific strategies to address immediate enrollment growth in 16-17 next fall, and then also take a snapshot at areas to address longer-term growth and some of the provisions for that. And then at the end of that, we'll talk about immediate next steps and follow-up. So with that said, I will turn it over to Mr. Harkerode. He does have a lot of data to share with you tonight. And so with that said, Mr. Harkerode, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner. As Dr. Wagner mentioned, we'll finish the listening tour meetings this week, and once we complete those meetings, we will give you the compiled results on the feedback that we've received. We do want to extend thanks to Trish Biddle. She's done a lot of work on this and compiling all this data, so thank you very much, Trish. We're seeing a little shift on the trend. There's one of the consistencies has been on prioritizing the major enrichment components. Technology has consistently been the top priority for almost all of the groups, and then when you aggregate it has stayed as the top priority on the aggregated analysis as well. Career Technology Education and Junior ROTC has aggregates as the second highest priority. The shift is on the third and the fourth. What we saw early on was the collaborative learning spaces were trending as the number 3 priority, and the multipurpose practice facilities were trending as the fourth, and that has shifted slightly. Multipurpose is trending as the third priority at this point, after 3 of the 4 town hall meetings, and the collaborative learning space is trending as a slightly lower priority at number 4. On other, we've given groups an opportunity to list any other area that they would like for us to consider. There's really no consistent theme on the other category. Within groups, there is some consistency. An example would be the secondary principals. When we met with them, they had a write-in item that dealt with the non-traditional program, was a higher priority item for them than the multipurpose practice facilities. And as we're visiting with some of the groups, we're seeing having a greater emphasis on dollars for enrollment growth is been captured in other. It hasn't trended as a higher priority than the other 4, but it is something that's been a theme at some of our meetings. So that's where we are. We have 3 groups left. We're currently at 499 respondents to date, and so we will give you that compiled information along with the detailed information by group, along with the comments from each group shortly after our last meeting this week. So questions about that part before we move on? Yes, ma'am.
Does that, the 499, does that include the people who have completed the survey online on our website, or is that the handout?
That is 499 are the hard copy handouts from the meetings only. And so we will wait and close the online respondent activity when we close our meetings for the thank you tours, and we'll capture that information as well and have that as a separate line. It's fairly low at this point. So certainly we could have some additional activity, but it's just a handful at this point. As far as recurring themes, what we're hearing, there are concerns about the cost and the scope for the multipurpose practice facility, and these are not necessarily in any particular order, but we're hearing that, and we're going to share some additional information with you as far as the detail on how we arrived at the cost. And then what's included in that scope. We've had a number of folks that have raised issues about other districts building something for considerably less money, and so we're going to address that with you tonight too. But that is certainly one. One of the pieces that I think people are having a little more difficulty wrapping their mind around. It has to do with the innovative learning spaces and what we envision for the libraries. So there's some need for some more specificity as to what that would involve and how we see that being affecting instruction in our buildings. There's the other theme is a concern that we have not specifically addressed enrollment growth except for at Richardson High and Lake Highlands High in the bond, and some concern as to whether or not we have funds available to address that as we move forward. So those are areas that we would expect to try to address. The strategies that Dr. Wagner mentioned for short-term, when we say short-term, 2016-17 enrollment growth would be, as we've already discussed, looking at the eligibility for both the Math Science Technology Magnet and the Graphical Classical Magnet. Currently those two schools are closed eligibility for Lake Highlands attendance area, and so revisiting that, as well as looking at the offerings at the Hamilton Park Pacesetter Magnet to ensure that that's as robust as possible, and trying to expand that program and build on their legacy and what they've done over the years, and just try to make that as attractive of an option as we possibly can for as many volunteers as possible. So that's something that's already underway. Relocating central programs is something that we've committed to reviewing, and Dr. Goodson and his staff are continuing to do that as a strategy. Of course, overflow will remain a strategy for us. I know it's one that a number of folks don't necessarily care for, but it will be a strategy, has been a strategy, and will continue to be a strategy for us, as will class size waivers. We had a point where we had in excess of 200. At one point, those have fallen down dramatically, but certainly that is an option that we can consider for next year. And then just room utilization in general, in addition to the work for central programs that Dr. Goodson is doing. And then certainly a short-term option, something that would not require construction or as much lead time, but would certainly involve considerable communication, would be redrawing attendance boundaries without construction to try to balance out attendance areas where we have capacity as opposed to schools that we do not. So certainly all those things are items and strategies that could be available to us for 2016-17. What we envision happening is we'll bring you a packet of material. We'll be discussing that in committee before your January meetings, and then we'll be bringing you packets of material that have these options in greater detail with some specifics for those in your January meetings that you'll be able to discuss. We would envision sharing that with you initially at January 5th when you receive the updated demographer's report, and then give you some time to reflect on that, and then any additional information that you would need, we can certainly bring it back for your January regular board meeting. You could even discuss it into February. The intent would be that you have enough information to be able to make a decision about the dollar amount and the scope of items and the number of propositions that you would like to consider for calling an election, which would have to be done in February. I think the deadline for that under the election law is February 19th. You have 2 meetings, and we've discussed that we would prefer that item be considered on February 1st as opposed to February the 15th. And the reason for that, if there's any issue or any problem at all, and you wait to do it on the 15th, that would not allow you any time to be able to bring the item back. Whereas if you bring it on the 1st, and if there's something that needs to be discussed or additional information is required, you'd have the opportunity to bring that back on the 15th as well for consideration. So that's the intent as far as what it would culminate with and what our timeline would be. Some of the strategies, processes to address future growth that would require, certainly they can be something that would be addressed within this period of time. We wouldn't necessarily be able to implement them for 2016-17, but these will include, because we want to wait and get the Templeton demographic report on January the 5th, get that updated information. But some of those options would be everything from building a new school, and we're in the process of identifying opportunities for that, and we'll be sharing that with you in January. In addition to adding classrooms to existing campuses, we'll share information with you about capacity not just in Lake Highlands. There are other areas where we have issues, and we'll be sharing information with you about each of those campuses, what the current capacity is, current enrollment, what the available footprint looks like on those sites, and where we feel like there's a meaningful opportunity to address adding additional classrooms at those sites. So additional classrooms with no boundary changes, additional classrooms with boundary changes as well as part of that, and then also some additional information on redrawing attendance boundaries with or without construction. All those pieces we'll be bringing you in January. The questions about that before I move into the next piece? Great. Sir?
Just a real quick question. You mentioned time, or possibly building a new school. What would be the timeline on that?
We would need about 24 months to do that, realistically.
Is that including assembling land in order to make that happen?
Well, assuming that the land acquisition did not take longer than about 3 months, we could still do it within that window. If we had an issue with land that the acquisition took longer than that, then it would stretch that 24-month timeline. I think Mr. Longenecker would tell you that ideally, realistically, to get through the zoning process and the building permitting process with the city, you really need 24 months on it. So we would try to crush that down, and that's part of why we're already moving to try to identify some potential sites now.
Thank you.
Other questions? One of the questions, I'm going to address the multipurpose practice facility in just a second, but the sources and options for funding has been a question that's come up several times at our meetings, and certainly Bond 2016, that's the purpose for those meetings, is to get input and determine what items need to be included. So for a large capital item like building a new school or even adding on 2 schools, that would be the preference, is to put it into that 2016 bond plan, assuming that the timing for receipt of those funds would coincide with our timing of when we wanted to complete construction and everything available. So that's first priority. Second would be to continue to use our capital projects funds. And I know we've had a number of concerns that some folks, I think, view that as we have a bottomless bucket of money that we can just magically pay for all of these things, and that's certainly not true. But we have enough funds there to be able to cover the obligations that we have made, the board has agreed to already, and then there will be additional monies coming into it over the next 2 years based on continued expected value growth that would allow us to certainly to cover additions to a school, and there would be a question as to whether you could build an entire school with it, but I believe we could. But again, that would not be our preference. I want to remind everybody what we've used capital projects funds for is when you have issues that present themselves that don't line up with when you're building a bond package. We've stepped in and used those capital projects funds to address those items. The growth that we've experienced, the construction that we experienced and we have completed starting in 2012, those really they just barely started presenting themselves for us and that solution for us when we were doing the planning for the 2011 bond. And so most of that occurred after we'd already passed, called the bond election, determined the dollar amount and the scope of projects. And so we used capital projects so we didn't have to adversely affect the integrity of the scope of the 2011 bond, what we made that commitment to with our community. So that would be what I would recommend that you continue to use that for. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you go out and grab any other bond projects and push them into that just to use it. I would say you just hold that and continue to use it as that source that would be available as items present themselves outside of the bond scope. And then what we've talked about at meetings, because we've had some audience members that have pushed on that a little bit and didn't feel like that was an adequate enough source of funds or response. And so what we've tried to do is illustrate that we are financially very strong and we have multiple resources that could be used. We've used the examples of permanent school fund, a little over $18 million that we created a number of years ago to generate a revenue stream. I would not recommend you exhaust that unless that was an absolute last option, because it is designed as a revenue stream. It is a reserve for us It is something that helps our credit rating, especially if you're going to go out and we're going to increase the debt tax rate. Doing that and pulling down that debt service, that permanent school fund simultaneously would adversely affect our credit rating. So what we've said several times is, if we are below that 10-cent increase, we feel like we can sustain that as long as all the other metrics remain the same. And that is one of those other metrics, the reserves that we have available. So certainly it is there. One of the things we have done that you could access is we have, I still call them designations on the fund balance, but we have set aside approximately $8 million for extraordinary construction and repair within our fund balance that the board could access at your will on this. And so we could pull a little over $8 million immediately to address anything that were to come up. So those are examples of the sources, and certainly we can access fund balance. We have a healthy fund balance. It is below what what's considered the optimal fund balance by the state, but it is certainly a healthy fund balance, and that is another area that you could access if we need to. So that combination of funds, I feel like is more than adequate to address whatever we would be wanting to do to address enrollment growth.
So, Mr. Harkleroad, just a quick question on the capital projects funds then, so that we're all on the same page. What do you anticipate that fund level to be? And I know there are some assumptions that you have over the next 24 months. Where are we today, and where do you anticipate us to be?
Well, once you satisfy our current commitments, we would have, at the end of this fiscal year, we should have about $5 million of available capital projects funds at the end of this fiscal year. The next fiscal year, assuming that our value growth is at least as high as what we're projecting, and we're using a fairly conservative number for 16-17, I believe it's 2% is what we're using there, and we feel like we have no indication that it will be below that. We have every indication that it will be above that, and at this point. So if it is, then you would be looking at, I'd have to do the calculation for you, Ms. Caston, but that would put us well in excess of $15 million in capital projects funds alone. So to add on to a campus, as we've talked about, to build a new school, $24 million for an elementary school, and that does not include the cost of the land. To add on to a school depends on how many rooms you wanted to add on, but if you use something similar to what we've done, 6 classrooms, depending on the school, if it had to be sprinkled as well, you'd be looking at somewhere around $3 million to do that.
And then our current fund balance is what percent?
It is about 29%.
And then the Berkner listening tour meeting, I will tell you one thing that was really gratifying was that there was a comment from one of the audience members who was very appreciative of the high bond ratings and how fiscally conservative the board had been in taking the advice of our administration over the years to put us in a position where we do have flexibility. That many of our neighboring school districts who have used the lag over the last years, who now find themselves in a very difficult financial predicament, they're very appreciative of the work that we've done and that we continue to do to give us flexibility, as you said, in mid-bond years to address emerging needs in the community. So I do want to share that with you for those of y'all that were not at that meeting. So thank you, Mr. Harkleroad.
And one last item as far as a resource, there's nothing that says we can't have an additional bond election. You know, we've done them every 5 years, but that certainly doesn't mean that we couldn't have an additional election. If something were to come up and we had to complete construction or build multiple schools, we could call another bond election. So that is certainly an option that the board has available. So we think that combination puts us in a good position to be able to address it. What we will very likely do when you see revised bond planning document in January is we can put a placeholder in for additional construction. We don't necessarily have to identify what that would include specifically, but we can, if we're confident that over the next couple of years that we would have to add on to one or more schools, we can put a placeholder in for that, so we don't have to have that discussion about whether or not we have ample reserves in capital projects to be able to address them. So I think that that's a strategy that we will more than likely include. Other questions on this piece, and then I'd like to move into the multipurpose practice facility if I can. Mr. Bono?
Just one quick clarification. So the $5 million capital projects fund balance at the end of 2016, is that, I'm assuming that's after deduction for ops center and school? Okay.
Yes, that's after we satisfy all of our outstanding
So we haven't
obligations.
spent those dollars by that point. They're already.
We obligate them. Yeah, we would encumber them, and so that would be the net available. Other questions on the multipurpose practice facility? What we've included is there's been a number of questions as to how we arrived at the number, and that the number seemed high. We've had some examples that various folks have provided, and we're going to talk about that. One of the examples of one of the town hall meetings was Highland Park built a practice facility for a couple of years ago for $4.5 million, and it was the same as what we're talking about, and why is it going to cost us 4 times that to build one here? So we've got a couple of things. You should have a copy of the materials, and we have some extra copies. I believe Mr. Clark has some, if anyone in the audience would like a copy. But there's a multi-page document. The first page has and this is in response to the request for additional data, and this is just one area. So within athletics, you have a page that expands each of those line items for athletics. Does everybody have that page? It has our ISD bond 2016 planning document across the top. Athletics is the department. And then it has $90 million budget total, $90,725,335. Everybody found that page? So what we've done is taken what you saw before, which rolled those totals up, and we've expanded that. We had the detail, but we compressed that just for ease of review, and so that we didn't move off into too much detail, but we have had a number of folks say we like the detail. Well, we have a lot of detail, and we're happy to share it with folks if they really want to get that information, but we'd like to start with this level and go from there, because we have thousands of lines of detail for all these items, so I'm not sure you really want to see that. But this gives you an expansion of all those items that are included within the category, by area, by school, number of units, the quantities on here, cost per unit, total program request, and then down at the bottom where it has multi-purpose practice facilities, there's just a single line, $81,520,195. If you flip to the second page, what we've got, and I have Mr. Longnecker here, and he's the expert on this, so if we get into a question that I can't answer, I'm going to defer to him. It goes into detail, and this is a separate file, Kara, I believe, on top of this one. You should have a flash drive with Mr. Longnecker left up there, so Michael may want to come up and help him find that. You have a hard copy that you can refer to while they're pulling the file. That hard copy for indoor practice facilities, what it does is at the top, it had 5 school districts we pulled in the area that had indoor practice facilities. We showed when they were built, how much it cost to build them, and what the field specifications were for those. Lancaster is highlighted, and we use Lancaster as a model for us to build our preliminary budget. And the reason for that is because it was the closest in specification to what Mr. Doobie and Mr. Bradford indicated that they wanted for the program. So that number, it cost them, and this is something that I think it causes some of the confusion. People start quoting numbers that it only cost X million dollars to build a building. The construction contract that was approved by Lancaster ISD was $11.5 million. That did not include architectural, engineering, site prep work, any other fees. That was just the cost to build the building. So what Mr. Longenecker has done is taken that figure, and it was done in 2005, and he's rolled that number up using inflationary index for prior years, and then the documentation he has uses a 5% compounded inflationary figure for construction for our area for the period from current through when we would expect the construction to occur. So he adjusts their costs in 2005 to arrive at a 2017 cost figure of $16.25 million per site. Now that's still a little ways off from what we have included. So what he's done then is you look into that conceptual budget, he takes that $16.252 million and then he is reconciling our scope to their scope. So their scope did not include renovation of the existing weight room and facilities inside the existing building. $250,000 per site estimate. Their dollar figure also, as I mentioned, did not include site development. That would include utilities, water retention system, which we're required to do, demolition in many cases. At some of our campuses, we have more demolition than others. Bergner would have a green space, and so you have no demolition costs there just really to speak of. But the other sites have some demolition, and Richardson High would have the most extensive. So we used an average for that. And then reconstruction of existing improvements, because these sites are non-greenfield sites, whereas some of these other schools, when they built these, they were going into a greenfield doing it and didn't have to worry about any of that type of thing. So that was $1.2 million, 7.5% was the basis. Project development budget includes architecture, engineering, surveys, soil testing, zoning fees, all the technology that would be incorporated in FF&E, which is not in the construction number that was quoted by any of these districts. That figure, and also would address some of the differences in scope for some of the sites, because there are some slight differences in scope, and you can see that below for Lancaster. That figure is $2.65 million per site. You add those together, and that's where you get the $20,380,000 per site. So that's how we arrived at the number. And you can look at Lancaster, the RISD projected scope, and then the Lancaster scope, and Mr. Longenecker has indicated where Lancaster's scope agreed with ours and where it did not agree. So the masonry exterior did not agree. We have a higher standard required under both the City of Dallas and City of Richardson for that. Lancaster did have the 80-yard field with the 2 end zones and the 10-yard warning or safety zone. So that was the reason they were selected. But they have several of the other items. They do not have the golf putting area or the golf hitting area were not included in their scope. And then the fine arts storage was not included in the scope, as was the site work, water retention system was not included, displaced parking was not included, and then the renovation of vacated spaces. All those things were included in those conceptual budget adjustments that we had above. Multiply that times 4, and you get the $81.5 million. So that's how we arrived at the cost. This is the detailed information that we have on that, and what we would like to do is either post this as part of the website so people can refer to it, or include it in our frequently asked questions so people can refer to it so they don't think that we just made this up. But that's how we arrived at the number. The next page, I wanted to speak to Highland Park in particular. That came up at the Lake Highlands Town Hall meeting. We had a young lady that said, I guess she worked at Highland Park or drove by Highland Park or saw a picture of Highland Park or something, I'm not sure, and so it's quoting that they spent $4.5 million for an indoor practice facility that looked exactly like what we want to do. So what we did was get the specifications for Highland Park, and Mr. Longenecker visited with the architect for Highland Park and got the exact figures for it. It cost them $5 million. They built that in 2009. And so we tried to explain at the meeting that a 8-year differential will drive the cost up, and I think there was some reluctance to believe that, but it does. And so if we took the same format that we used to show you how we arrived at the number, the top part of it takes Highland Park's cost of construction only in 2009, $5 million, and adjusted for inflation, you get $6.4 million. Now, so somebody would still say, well, okay, 6.4 times 4 is only $25.6 million, so what's the difference? The difference is that their facility is a 70-yard field with one end zone and no safety zone, and I believe the width is not the same width as ours. Mr. Doobie included I believe it is a 10-yard safety zone all the way around the facility to try to prevent injuries to students. So you have it not just on the length, but on the width as well. And that is not true at Highland Park. You can see it also does not include any other facilities within that. It is a enclosed turf field with 4 single stall bathrooms, and that's it. There's no weight room, there's no training facility, there's no storage, there's no office, there's no classroom space. None of those things are included. So if we want to strip all those items out of our scope, it certainly would reduce the cost. But just to try to make sure it's apples to apples, none of those things are included in the Highland Park example. So if you took the Highland Park example, which is the construction only, that 6.4, and you adjust it for site development, which is utilities and water retention, demo, reconstruction of existing improvements, that adds about $481,000 per site. And then if you added the project development cost, which is architect, engineering, survey, testing, zoning, all of that, it's about $1 million per site. We come up with just under $8 million is what it would cost us today to build it cost us in 2017 estimated dollars to build a site equivalent to Highland Park. And we can do that if that's what you want to do. If you want to reduce the scope, we can do that, and we can reduce the total cost to about $32 million as opposed to 80. And then what Mr. Longenecker has done is below that, we show scope. This is where they agree or disagree with current scope. I think if you look at the first line of that piece, I think that tells you most of what you need to know. Total square footage for Highland Park's indoor practice facility is 58,692 square feet. Total square footage for the indoor practice facility that we're proposing is 126,600 square feet. So you're talking about a facility that is twice the square footage of what Highland Park built. Now, whether that's necessary and whether that's what you want to move forward with, that's a question that will certainly have to be answered in the next 6 weeks. But that is the difference. So we cannot build a facility to the scope that our staff have identified for the same amount of money that Highland Park built theirs, because they're not the same. I know I went through that quickly. Mr. Longenecker, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Very well.
Are there questions on that piece before I go on?
Yeah, I just have one, since we're talking about this piece then. So, and perhaps this is a question for Mr. Doobie, but I'm just looking at back on the page where the Lancaster costs are broken down. So we based it on Lancaster. I'm just seeing that a lot of the other districts that we've looked at don't have the size facility that we do. So I guess I'm just, the rationale behind feeling like we needed the 80 yards plus 2 end zones and why did we decide to base it on Lancaster, I guess is the question.
Well, we didn't base, we based our cost estimate on Lancaster because it was as close to the scope that had been identified by Mr. Doobie and Mr. Bradford as possible. I don't think that they based their scope on Lancaster. They based their scope on, a lot of it had to do with marching band. The size of field that they needed to be able to have an entire marching band be able to practice. And so that was really the driver for the 80 yards. Then I think Mr. Dubie's, what he included, and certainly I'm not trying to speak for him, and Ms. Brown, if you have additional information you want to share, that's fine. But I think Mr. Dubie was concerned when he looked at some of these other facilities that they did not have what he considered to be an adequate safety zone around the field, and he felt that it was important to include 10 yards around whatever playing surface you have, whether it be for soccer or football, and in order to protect students. So that is a wider zone than many of these facilities have. It's wider than Highland Park, it's wider than McKinney, the one that we looked at. They may only have a 10-foot zone on the width, and we have a 10-yard zone on either side on the width. So he didn't use Lancaster as his model. It was just that was the one that most closely approximated what he and Mr. Bradford had identified in the scope. But that is a great question about, what can be done to modify it, because that drives the cost. If you can reduce that square footage, and then the other piece that drives the cost are all of those ancillary facilities that are attached to the building. We have 4,000 square feet of fine arts storage. We have 2,000 square feet of athletic storage. Those are things that they've asked for repeatedly, and that they have indicated there's a need for at all 4 of the high schools. It includes a 7,500 square foot weight room, which is significant. But what we hear from all 4 of our high schools is the weight rooms that they have are severely overcrowded and are about, did you say, Michael, about half that size? Approximately, they're half that 7,500 square foot size. And then it includes the training facility as part of it for our trainers, and a classroom for instruction, a 1,000 square foot classroom, and an office for staff to be a part of that. So certainly we could look at any of those pieces. Those all drive the cost. All of those are temperature controlled spaces. The turf area is only heated but in forced ventilation, which is consistent with what we saw at all the other campuses. But that would certainly be some information we could bring back to you as to what other rationale is there as to the 80-foot field versus a 60-yard field at McKinney or Prosper. Other questions?
What about the height? If I recall, the height was such that would accommodate punting, and that maybe that seems to me, if I recall, the only thing that was that high. But if we altered the height significantly where we required that to be done outside, is that a way that the cost could be changed in some significant way?
Absolutely. If you drop the height 5 feet even, I think the estimates from our construction managers and architects would be that we could save approximately $125,000 in masonry costs per site alone. Is that correct? That is correct. So you're looking at $500,000 on aggregate, and that's just in masonry costs. So that doesn't include the reduced structural. I forgot to mention at Highland Park, the young lady that spoke said it had masonry construction all the way up, just like ours do. That's not true. They only did it on 2 sides. The side you can see from the street have brick construction, and we would not be able to do that in Richardson and Dallas. We would have to have all 4 sides masonry, not just 2. So our masonry costs are double, even if it were the same square footage building. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
So is the punting the only thing that requires that height that we would choose?
Kicking and passing. It would affect kicking and passing for football and soccer is what it would affect.
But not baseball, not.
No, because the hitting, any of the batting for baseball would more than likely be in a netted area, and so it wouldn't affect. They don't necessarily have to see how high it goes just to hit it, but that would be the only 2. It would be kicking and passing for football and kicking for soccer.
And none of the fine arts issues or the fine arts uses have any height restrictions or maintenance?
No.
Mr. Bone? First of all, thank you for this level of detail. And
sure.
I think those that have asked a lot of questions about this, and specifically linkage to some of these other facilities would be very helpful. So, one question just about our scope and better understanding, I guess, of, I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about the weight room, relocating that, making that into bigger wrestling facilities, but with some of the storage moving over to this facility, coaches, I guess, I'm assuming these offices are coaches' offices moving out of the main facility and into this facility. So I guess I'm trying to get a picture of what's moving out of all the space that's crammed into our locker rooms, and is there a locker room overhaul in our, that'll see locker room on here. I'm assuming we're keeping locker room in its current location, and is there included in this a rework of that locker room given all the pieces that we're taking out and moving across the way?
No, we had already tried to address locker rooms a little earlier. What it would do is, I don't necessarily envision that a coach would be displaced, or it's really an office for any staff that would have groups that would be out there. So it could be athletics, it could be fine arts, it could be used by anyone, and so they would use that while they had, or they could use that while they had students in the building, but they wouldn't necessarily be permanently housed out there. The weight room, I think what fine arts would tell you on their storage is that they don't necessarily have enough dedicated storage in the existing buildings, and so it's everywhere. It's in the hallway, it's jammed up behind things, and anywhere they can get it, in some places where it probably shouldn't be even. But they would say that they just simply do not have the existing storage, so we're not really displacing current storage in the building. What we're trying to do is give them what they would consider to be an adequate amount of storage. Now, on the athletics side, and Mr. Doobie has indicated that he certainly would have some flexibility. This was an ideal case, the 2,000 square feet, just to give them some capacity without immediately filling it up. But if we had to reduce that number, or if we felt like we wanted to reduce that number, we could. We could cut that in half, and that would still give them the opportunity to put equipment that would be used out in that facility, could be stored there instead of having to store it in wherever. It's on top of lockers and grabbing up existing space just wherever they can. It's kind of catch as catch can as at the high school level. So it's we don't necessarily envision having to renovate the locker rooms on it. Where we think those dollars would go is to take those existing weight rooms, because what we heard consistently in all 4 high schools is that the wrestling rooms are not adequate to meet the number of kids that are participating, is to take that weight room and convert it into that existing space into the wrestling room, and then take the wrestling room and convert that into a secondary training area, would be the intent. And that will look a little different at each one of the high schools, but no dollars in for renovation of the locker rooms.
So I had an opportunity, along with Mr. Bono and Dr. Kewen, to go visit the McKinney multipurpose facility, and I've had an opportunity to visit the Highland Park facility. And I will tell you, if you look at the criteria that we're going to have to consider in terms of how we support the configuration, the number one consideration that I can see the difference between the proposed facility and their facilities is safety. The Highland Park facility, I would be very concerned for kids running into the walls, band members, color guard. I mean, there is no space at all, either in the end zone or on the sides. And McKinney does have end zones or buffers, but the sides are the same way. So there's definitely some safety concerns. Highland Park is basically, think of your gym at one of our 4 high schools and put AstroTurf on it. And that's basically it. They've got some weight racks at the end of it, but their athletic director was sharing with me that they cannot have their entire football team lift in one spot. They have 4 racks in the multipurpose facility. They have weight racks on the terrace of their stadium, and then they have a weight room in their high school that they can't. They have kids in 3 areas. as a big safety concern for them. I think the other thing we look at is the ancillary features that we have. I mean, there's opportunities with storage, which we may not think of in our experiences as a big deal, but it's huge. That was one of the things that Coach Ringo cited, is they're tearing down their state tennis center next door to their indoor practice facility in part for storage, locker rooms, offices, and they're relocating their pool there so they can build new classrooms at the high school. But the storage, the classroom space is huge. Highland Park did share that they hosted a global initiative conference in their multipurpose facility last month. So they're seeing, uses for it besides athletics and fine arts. The third area, and Mr. Harcourt, you just mentioned that, was to meet current needs and provide for future growth. And we had the opportunity to talk to Coach Lonnie Jordan at Lake Highlands High School after their bond listening tour. And he indicated that he had, that his projection was at least 1,500 students out of the roughly 2,500 students at Lake Highlands would make use of the facility. And he said, that's just today. He said, with the opportunity for a larger facility that we might be able to engage more students. And then for them, as well as our other high schools, the expansion of the wrestling program, especially for some of our underserved students, our Hispanic students and all, that they're limited by the capacity of that program. So as we look at student engagement, there's a lot of opportunities. So Mr. Harcourt, I think, we've all heard, the comments, and I appreciate you bringing this back, as Mr. Bono said, in giving us this detail. And I think it's important that we get this on our website quickly so that people can, as you were saying, compare apples to apples, because everybody has something different. Coach Ringo was saying his facility at Plano East, I believe, was 50 or 60 yards. He said, it's not big enough to do anything. So I appreciate the way that you guys have been thoughtful, Mr. Longnecker and Mr. Doobie and Mr. Bradford, in all these considerations and pulling this together. So, just to continue to bring us those criteria and things that we should be thinking about as we, move forward with this and to a decision point in January or February would be very helpful.
So we will continue to review. I know that Dr. Stone and Ms. Bram have been visiting with Mr. Bradford and Mr. Doobie to see what opportunities are there to be able to reduce the scope. Because you're right, everyone's right. It is a huge ticket item. I mean, there's no question about that. So as long as if we can pull that number down and still provide the program that we want to provide for our kids and keep them safe, then I think everyone is willing to look at that. If the only people impacted on the height are the kickers and you have a little bit of a diminished effect on soccer practice and on the throwing piece, is it worth being able to shave off at least $500,000? I mean, that's a question we'll have to answer. Can we take 5 yards off? Can we take 10 yards off since we have an end zone on either side and a 10-yard buffer? Can we cut the classroom? Can we cut the part of the athletic storage? All those pieces of scope will add up and try to pull that number down as much as we can. And so we'll be bringing you some options as we have the discussion in January before you make the decision. One last piece on the multipurpose, if you flip to the next page, I know there's been considerable dialogue about Richardson High School because it has the tightest footprint. You have a couple of schematics there that show what the size of the space is as proposed. I think the first one shows you that, and just shows you it going onto the B field as really what Mr. Longnecker has determined is the only viable option given the size of the facility. What we did, there's been a number of questions as well. Could you move it here? Could you do this? Could you split? Could you split off the ancillary portion from the indoor practice piece? If you look at that line that's there on it, it kind of looks like a refrigerator. The lower part of it is the indoor practice part. The upper part is the ancillary piece. If you flip to the next slide, that shows you just the footprint of the indoor practice facility on that one. That shows you if you strip off the ancillary and put it doesn't have to be adjoining the indoor practice facility. It doesn't have to be. I think staff would prefer that it be, but it doesn't have to be. But even if you strip off the ancillary portion of that, the indoor practice piece still basically takes the B field. So the question has been, what if you moved it around? And what if you were to consider, there's some sites north of West Junior High that at some point in the past have been for sale or could be for sale. So if you looked at contiguous property included with that, if you go to the next slide, what it does is it takes that footprint for the indoor practice facility and then we just move it around. We've had people say, well, put it where the newcomer center is, or put it over on the west side of the stadium, or how about that space in between the baseball field and the stadium, or what about those properties? And Kara, there should be a slide that has like all of them on there at once, that one. So what we did is we just spun it around and put it everywhere we could think of to put it, short of tearing the building down. And I think what you can see is it doesn't fit anywhere else. So if you put it over on the west side, unless you're going to affect the press box for the stadium, you would be into the street based on the width of it. If you try to put it in that space, there is a little bit of unused space between the track and the baseball field. If you did that, you would take up about a third of the outfield of the baseball field to do it. If you put it down where the newcomer center is, you would take up all 6 lanes of Beltline. Or you would have to go into the homes that are behind the newcomer center to do that. And through an eminent domain type of an action. At one point, there's a church that's up on the upper left-hand corner of that property. Go over to your other left a little bit. There you go. That one has been for sale before, and it's possible that it may come on the market again. But if you put it there, it looks like it fits, but it doesn't fit because you again would have to include a fire lane around the building. So it won't fit. There's a water tower there, that big white dot, that one, that's a water tower, and you have a hard stop right there. And so it doesn't fit within that space with a fire lane. And then there is another church, and I'm certainly not trying to say we're going to eminent domain that church or anything like that. Please don't take that away. But we just looked at contiguous property just to show you it won't fit on the eastern property either. The church that's located there, it just doesn't fit within that footprint. So hopefully that answers the question, and we can put this out and share this when we visit with the Richardson High School community as well, because I know there will be some anxiety about the location. Are there questions about that piece?
No, but Tony, I just want to give you a big fat thank you because you did not put that blue box on top of my church, which is at the southeast corner of Beltline Richardson, and I'm glad that you didn't because the elders would have been calling me about that.
Well, I don't want the elders from any church to call me. We're not. We're just showing you the size. It's just to illustrate the size of it and look at those options. So certainly not trying to indicate that we are looking at any type of eminent domain thing whatsoever. So that leaves us with the B field site. That's all I have on that.
So I agree with you that seems to be the clear winner in terms of location. The concern that I've heard a lot of people say or express, which I've heard us say that we're comfortable we can manage it, is just how do we coordinate the sharing with West of, that's basically the loss of their field, and are we comfortable that is not going to negatively impact their activities? So
we are. It does put an extra burden on Richardson High School. I mean, there's no question about that because of the 4 high schools, they're the only ones that have an adjoining junior high. So the B field there is used by West at times, so they'll have to coordinate schedule just like they do now. Is what would happen, but you're right, it does.
Mr. Harper, just a question. Does West or Richardson High School use the outfield of the baseball field for any other practices besides baseball?
I don't believe that they do because they do not want to damage the field. But we can get clarification from Mr. Doobie. That doesn't mean you don't have the stray event occur out there, but I think the baseball coaches feel pretty strongly about trying to maintain the integrity of the field.
And the only reason I ask is I know at other high schools where they have a shortage of fields, they've turfed their baseball field, and so that they can use it as an additional practice field for junior varsity or sub-varsity sports. That's the only reason I bring it up.
That is an option, and one of the things that Mr. Doobie has mentioned is, although it's not big enough for the indoor practice facility, is that space that is really covered by that part of one of those blue boxes there between the baseball field and the track, is to go in and look at, there's a little bit of a slope issue there, a drainage issue there, but coming into that space and leveling that off and making that, a smaller group practice area, so that if they have soccer where they're doing skills drills or something like that, where they don't need the whole field, they could use that, or junior varsity could use that, or golf, or a number of groups could give them one additional area, since they don't have that would be an option to consider.
I appreciate that, and I hope that we'll look at all the potential that we have, even given that it is landlocked, to provide as many practice opportunities as we can for the students at Richardson. So that would be great. Thank you.
And then to speak to the detail on the items, what we will be doing is if you're comfortable with this level of detail, and this is sort of what you had in mind, what we'd like to do is start with those 4 primary enrichment areas that we seem to have most of the questions about, and give you similar level of detail for each of those 4 to try to address questions. I know lots of questions with the libraries, for example, and so giving you that detail to show everyone how we arrived at that number and why it's so expensive for that, and push that out as part of the website as well. We have it for all the areas, but those are going to be the ones that we think the most of the questions will come up about.
Well, and I know you can't contact individually the people that were at the sessions before that asked those targeted questions, but whatever we can do to broadcast in some way that we have put this information on the website, so that those people that had those specific questions can access it, would be a good thing.
Absolutely. Although I would love to talk to the young lady that was from Highland Park, but anyway, we will certainly put that out, whether in the frequently asked questions or the website that has this information, to try to make sure it's available.
Mr. Lynn, do you have a question?
Just have one comment and one quick question. Just for the record, the one that straddles the baseball outfield, I think presents a really interesting dynamic for baseball games. Boston, they have the green monster. We could have the purple monster or the gold monster or something like that. But in all seriousness, I haven't ever seen a light. It's not, it depends on the component of the building. For example, the air conditioning on the ancillary facility, that's going to have about a 15-year useful life. The roof is going to have a 25+ year useful life. The structure itself, the structural steel and that type of thing, I mean, it would be 50 years. I mean, or longer. It would be like our buildings. I mean, we've got, Heights Elementary are built in 1951. You're not going to have to tear it down. So the components, you have to pull it apart by component. So probably the shortest lived asset that would be part of that would be the field itself, the turf. I think the estimated useful life on that is about 15 years. So that and the air conditioning would be the first thing that would have to be replaced. Thank you. Yeah.
Is that it?
Yep. It is for me.
And just kind of next steps and timelines, and Mr. Harker did a great job of covering all the steps, but just a reminder, we will get the Templeton report January 5th, and so we will have the most updated information at that point. And then right now we have the board meeting scheduled early in February for a decision point on the election, and that would be for total dollar amount and number of propositions, and the drop dead date is February 19th, but as Mr. Harper said, that wouldn't give you any option to have any flexibility and any changes if we wait. So we could find some happy medium between those dates if we needed to. And based on the Templeton report, we will be bringing you some definitive action plans and recommendations.
I think one of the things is we've done, this is, in the last 4 bonds, this listening tour has not been a part of that strategy, and so very appreciative of the opportunity to hear from the community up front and in advance, and certainly, their comments, their questions, their considerations are definitely valued and incorporated into the work that we're doing. So thank you. And thank you, Trish, for compiling this and summarizing it and taking on that project for us. Okay, at this time, we're going to move to another information item. Excuse me, I had to go through this. We're going to review the non-traditional program design draft. Dr. Wagner.
Okay, and that is page 53 for those of you who are flipping back and forth and inserting different handouts. But earlier, the board approved moving forward with the non-traditional program out of capital projects. And so what we ask our architects to do is to render a drawing and a schematic, and we're going to present that to you tonight. You do have a handout, should be, you've got an exterior drawing of the overall site plan. You have the conceptual rendering, and then you have floor 1 and floor 2. And Mr. Harper, do you want to walk us through specifics?
Certainly. When this item was approved earlier in the year, one of the things the board asked for was to provide touch points where you can see design information, and that's what we're doing. So what first page just gives you the site itself and where it would be located on the site. It would be adjoining the current annex and would take up the space occupied by the drive in between the annex and the transportation building, as well as the transportation building and the edge of the field that's there. So that's the proposed location for it. The second page gives you just a very conceptual rendering that will be finalized later on once the architects complete their work, and we'll give you additional feedback there. That would be red brick on the conceptual rendering, and then with some glass front on the entry feature there. And then we would tie in, when we do the renovation work on the annex, when the offices move and change, then we would tie in that red brick on the face of the annex as well. And currently, and I'm sorry, Sandra, on the first page of it, that on that site plan, right now it just shows new green space there, so we don't have all of the detail on that space. You will have an opportunity to provide input on what you would like for that to be going forward. You don't have to make that decision right now at all. But and then after the conceptual rendering, we have 2 different options that we've provided, and this is based on conversations with Dr. Stone and Ms. Branham as to what their needs are and what they would like to see for the site. This is the first scheme, first level, 4 classrooms, office space there that would also include growth, potential growth if you wanted to add an assistant principal, but currently includes a reception area, counselor, conference room, principal office. What we're calling the hub was where those, it looks like X's are located, and we would envision that being kind of a multi-purpose area. There's not going to be a cafeteria per se, because the students would be there for shorter blocks of time. They won't necessarily be there all day. It would be an AM session, a PM, an afternoon session, and an evening session. But there would be vending that would be available, and so students could certainly have breakfast or lunch or dinner there, but we envision that being a collaborative space where they could, there would be a lot of technology in that zone, and they could work. If you look over in that open area on the left-hand side, there's what looks like a countertop with some chairs that would be a device bar that students could plug into and be able to work. And then that area in the hub that's in the upper left-hand corner is like a career center or go center that would be available to students to use, and really for any student to use and staff to use, to come in there and just have an area for resource. Then the 4 classrooms and then restrooms for it. The controlled entry on that, and then that door on the lower portion of it would be a door that would actually go directly into the annex. So if you have staff from the annex that need to go into this site for professional development or for to address technology issues or whatever, they would have access without having to go outside to do that. But the main entrance would be on the right-hand side. That entry there would be the main entrance for the building. And then the next page shows the second floor. And in this version, it includes, what we did was we just maximized the space for professional development. And certainly an option would be to not build out the second floor, but at this point, based on the demand and the interest from staff, would be to go ahead and build that out. So you've got, what that creates is about a 4,100 square foot training facility on the lower end of the visual, and then about a 2,000 square foot training facility on the upper end. Both of those could be partitioned off to split up the space for smaller groups and give us the most flexibility possible. And then about 993 square feet on the training facility to the right. One of the things that was requested is an office space up there, which is that kind of flesh-colored area, because the staff that would be servicing the students, it may be a variety of staff, and they may be sharing that classroom space. And so this would allow, it would be an open area, cubicles, where each one of those teachers or staff members would have a space that they could go to for planning and to be able to work that would be their own space, but not a whole entire classroom. And then some storage would be included there as well. If you go to the next, and I'm sorry, there is a little coffee area right there by the elevator. The elevator is kind of the X right by the stairwell that's up on the upper right-hand side. There is a coffee area there that would have ice maker, water, coffee, that type of thing. And then there would be millwork in each one of those rooms for people to set up materials and do whatever they wanted to do on the walls. And then, of course, technology would be included in all of those areas. If you go to the next slide, what we've done is we've taken, and I'm sorry, it's going to be on probably the other scheme there, scheme 2. And in your handouts, it is just the next page. You can skip that one. Okay, sorry. So really what's changed here is one of the concerns that was expressed is if you flip to your hard copy, scheme 1 had the stairwell to get to the second floor and the elevator to the second floor. You had to come in the building and kind of go past a classroom and sort of into the hub area to be able to access that. So the scheme 2 brings the stairwell to the front of the building. So a visitor, someone coming in for professional development could come in the front door, and then they could go hit the elevator, go up the stairs without going into the building where the hub is and where the rest of the classrooms are. So it would minimize some of the disruption that might occur by having folks come in and out. Now what that does, though, doesn't really change very much on the first floor. A very, very slight decrease in the total square footage for the hub. It looks almost identical. But what it does do on the second floor, that next slide, is it eliminates that 4,100 square foot training room. So in exchange for that, what you get is 2 3,000 square feet training rooms. Instead of one 4,100 and one 2,000, you get two 3,000. Now you still have that second, or that one training room that's about 1,000 square feet. That stays fairly constant, both designs. So that's the impact on the second floor by moving that stairwell. The offices just shift and the storage just shifts, but you're just swapping out some professional development space. So what we would like from you on this piece is your preference on scheme 1 or 2.
I have a question.
Any questions?
I had heard in our discussions over the last couple of months, is those floors could be anywhere from 10,000 square feet to 14,000 square feet. You know, we could have a 28,000 square foot facility. So we landed on what, a 23,000 square foot?
Do you have the overall, is that about right? 23, 24,000 square feet. And so what has happened is the cost estimate originally was about $13 million for this, and we're down to $9,986,000. I believe is where we are right now. And that's before we go out and do bids for guaranteed maximum price and go out on the street with the bids.
Okay. And then...
yes, we did reduce the square footage. We were able to cut the scope without affecting the integrity of the program. And the thought was you had some larger rooms on the first floor that were associated with the non-traditional school, like a big, huge lecture hall and area that the students, if they needed a room like that, they would use the PD rooms that are on the second floor. So we get double duty on that. Instead of duplicating that space on the first floor, we just use the spaces on the second floor.
And then the other conversation that we had over time was looking at the green space that is there, that's currently the quote memorial stadium, but the football field, the soccer stadium that has the metal bleachers, and discussed perhaps partnerships with the city of Richardson, much as the same as we did at Northridge Elementary, tying that green space into somewhat of a community space, and the walking path, etc. Have you had an opportunity to talk with officials from the city of Richardson, or have we discussed any types of, recognizing, that history and tradition?
Very preliminary only, and it was at the onset, but very receptive to that.
That's correct. I mean, we don't have we haven't gotten to that level yet. And so certainly for tonight's purposes, we don't have that detail, but you will have additional opportunities to be able to decide what you would like to do to memorialize the service in World War II, and then to expand that green space. I think what Mr. Longenecker has done is left it a fairly open palette there for us to develop. And so we're just looking at it being green space right now. And then the what you see exactly, whether it's partnership with the city on the trail that would be there, or whether, or the some type of memorial that would be included in that garden area between the non-traditional site and the administration building.
Well, that to me is personally exciting, because we don't have, as a city, that type of green space, with the new mixed-use developments coming in. And, I appreciate, Mr. Longenecker, you're sharpening the pencil with the architects and estimating the cost, because that certainly gives us some flexibility to do some really value added for our community and for our district. So thank you for doing that. Appreciate it. Look forward to it. Are there other questions or observations, Mr. Greenhall?
I mean, I have a couple, and these are kind of technical. So when we are not using the second floor as professional development, would we not be air conditioning and heating it and using of utilities in that area? And that my concern is if we have offices up there that you have to heat and air condition the whole space simply for those offices, And maybe that's not a consideration from a cost standpoint, but it seems like it might be.
It would be, you'd have zones, just like we do at the PDC right now. So, you know, if someone's in that office space, that unit would run and have that controlled. But if that larger space were unoccupied, what we normally do is we schedule those, and so we'd have to have someone, and since it's close proximity to the annex, you know, it could easily be coordinated with EMS to where our energy management system, to where they have a schedule, and then we would only run it when there were staff in the rooms.
And is there some kind of security plan between the first and second floor so students don't have the ability to wander up there and have access to that open space in some way?
You cannot restrict access to the stairwells or the elevators under code. That would be illegal. So what?
Do you have a thoughtful plan about how to?
Well, there'll be surveillance cameras in the building, and so, you know, there'll be a building principal and there'll be staff in the building, and so certainly we want to encourage any of the students that are there. We really think most of the students, when they're coming in for a specific purpose, but we think that really the hub will be what attracts them. Now, the rooms on the second floor, they could be locked, and there could be a way to control those if there's not anything scheduled for them, so you don't have folks just wandering around there. But there really won't be much up there for them to get into, other than just the offices for the staff that would be in the building. But we can certainly look at that.
And then, I can show you, but I'm just wondering too, on that second draft, if maybe you couldn't put the stairwell sideways so that you still could have the access to that big building. I can show you, I don't know anything about construction, and so that may absolutely.
Yeah, we've spun that around about as many ways as we can, and so you end up losing the space.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Greenhall. Mr. Oliver?
Mr. Harper, were you asking us for feedback of like 1 versus 2?
Yes.
Okay, because I would kind of defer to what you guys think is best from a student PD perspective. My only observation would be that I'd hate to give up that big room, just because that's really nice to be able to have that extra space if you need it for just whatever. But is there an opinion that staff has in terms of what's best for the students and from a professional development perspective?
We had a pretty lengthy discussion about that earlier, and I think really in developing draft 2, and we asked Mr. Harker and Mr. Longenecker to go back and do that, was to separate the people coming into the building so that they could go directly up to the second floor, so that we wouldn't have people traipsing through the hub and all of that, because that's where our non-traditional program is going to be. So we envision that being pretty full of students, and otherwise they're coming in that door, and there would be days that you could have 100, 200 people there, and to prevent them from just going through the middle of that program. So that was the reason we asked for number 2. We did talk about the loss of some square footage space, but it was really one of those separation of people utilizing the center for the program.
And that seems like a compromise to me, so I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Dr. Kira?
Thank you. First of all, I like Scheme Review too, so this is some feedback for y'all. I want to echo what Ms. Caston said about collaborating with the city on that green space. I think we have a really unique opportunity, especially with the redevelopment that's going on downtown, to partner with them and create something that really could honor the legacy of what that space was meant to be as far as the World War II Veterans Memorial. And so just really would like to affirm that is a direction that we would like y'all to move down, because that space could end up being really cool, and I would love to see us partner with them and see if they'd kick in some money too to help develop it, right? I mean, it's going to help them too as far as their green space development. And then finally, you may have shared this with us early on in these development conversations, Tony, so if you did and I didn't lock it in at the time, excuse me for that, but why does this building need to adjoin the annex?
Well, there's no advantage to separating them. at all. In our mind, there are some disadvantages to separating them. You're going to, if you separate them, you're going to have, what are you going to do with that space between those two buildings? And then we've got a fire lane access issue if you separate them, depending on what that distance is. So there's, the only thing that's an issue for us is if you were to look at your site plan, if you move to the left of the annex and go towards the back of the property, there is a generator that's about 2/3 of the way back. That's the only constraint that we have there. But we felt like the advantage was just access. Anytime we have a campus that has two buildings that are separated by any amount of space, we always get requests to connect them. So in my mind, if we build this building and separate it from the annex, you will not make 2 years before somebody comes forward and says, now why didn't we connect these two buildings? Because I've got staff that go back and forth between those buildings and have to go out into the elements all the time. We get that question at the PDC about enclosing that breezeway between the buildings all the time. Why can't we cache that space? Why? Now thank goodness we didn't build it that way, so we don't have to answer that. We bought it that way. But there's no real advantage to separate them. If the concern is that you don't want to have that ready access and you want to be able to control it, then you make the door going into it be a badge control point of entry. Because that entry is not required under code, I don't believe. Is that correct, Michael? So you could make it employees only would be able to access go through that door for entrance egress. Otherwise, there is no advantage to separating the two buildings.
Thank you, that clarifies. I guess the other...
That's a longer answer than you were...
No, that's very helpful, thank you. So I guess the other, if we back up to that conceptual, the exterior, does that then mean that we would need to reface the outside of the annex so it's the same red brick that you're putting on the new high school building? Did you say that?
Yes, we are planning on doing that. And really not just for the aesthetic part of what we're looking at is with the offices that will be coming into the annex, there is a need to have more than a single point of entry to the front of that building. I'll give you a couple of examples. Tax office. We have looked at a separate entry for the tax office so the folks can come in there and do their business and they're separated from the entry for student services. Another issue has to do with the clothes closet and making sure that they have good access, good proximity to the entry as well. So part of what we'd be doing when we reface that building is adding an additional point of entry and then also adding some windows. There are no windows in the annex at all. It's the only building we have that has 0 windows. So that's part of that.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. One concluding comment. Okay. I've got the button. Go ahead. Be quick.
I was just gonna, what's the button?
It's a double secret button, dude. Only Miss Hayes and I got the button.
My only comment is that I think we've this discussion about this facility has been an evolution, and for those reasons, we refer to it as the non-traditional facility, we're really expanding, we're adding on to the annex. It's the annex expansion, right? Because it's not a school, it's not a high school. We're not building a new high school, and it's for more than just the non-traditional programs. It's half the space is for professional development. So I just think we need to be a little more precise in our communications about it, because I think that's created a lot of confusion that why are we building a high school? Why are we building another high school? We're not. We're expanding the annex, and we're going to house a program there. So we just need to be, we don't want to contribute to the confusion.
And I appreciate that. That was going to be my concluding comment is we are not building a 5th high school. And I think one of the things that would be a great communication point, and we've already been working on that, is to our staff to let them know that this is the 2nd floor is a dedicated professional development center, which I think they would view positively. So thank you, Mr. Oliver, for that brief yet meaningful observation. So with that, Dr. Wagner, I think, Mr. Hargrove, do you have the affirmation from the board that you need?
So we will move forward with Scheme 2.
Yes, that's what I'm
And
hearing.
we will bring you additional information on the green space and opportunities to partner with the city, and also to address, make sure that we address the memorial for World War II.
Yes, and I think what you've heard is that the will of the board is that, we will rely on your professional judgment from both curriculum and instruction standpoint, and also from a facility standpoint. This has been an interesting agenda meeting tonight. It is already 9:27, so we have been meeting for 3 hours and 27 minutes. There's one last discussion I think that if our staff administrators would like to hear, we're going to have a brief discussion on the calendar, and then after that, boy, this is a loaded question. Dr. Wagner, if you're in agreement, I think we should let the executive directors and directors head out, and we will complete our business.
Can I go too?
But we will, our next item on the agenda will be the calendar discussion. Don't get between them and the doorway. You might get hurt. But we will do that, and then we have some board business to conclude, and then we will finish up tonight with a closed session. This is our only board meeting of December, so this agenda is full. So we appreciate you all sticking with us to the end. It's been an important meeting tonight. We've shared a lot of good information, and I know as you have questions, you guys will be subject matter experts on the topics that we've discussed tonight, so the board appreciates y'all being here. So with that, Dr. Wagner, the next item on our agenda is a discussion of the 2016-17 calendar.